4 years have passed since Emperor Cardion ascended the throne of Eshrashar, launching relentless wars of conquest across the continent. Caught in the vortex of battle sits a weary mercenary, concealing his true name and hiding from a past he fled long ago. His quiet exile stretches back a decade to the day his father delivered an unimaginable decree. At just 14 years old, he was abruptly told he must take a bride, the 16-year-old daughter of Baron Wibben, a quiet, gentle girl known for her love of gardening. Closing the heavy wooden doors behind him, he leaned back in complete disbelief. He was only a boy, bewildered by the sudden engagement, and unable to understand why a distinguished noble house would ever marry into a simple merchant family. Before he could process his father's command, his wedding day arrived. Standing beneath the chapel light, he anxiously gripped his white coat, watching the delicate trim of a bridal gown glide gracefully across the floor toward him. When she offered a polite greeting, his breath hitched in his throat. A deep blush spread across his face as Tyria Wibben curtsied before him, her calm composure making his heart race in an unfamiliar rhythm. Her golden hair reminded him of the sun-drenched wheat fields of the Wibben estate, and her light green eyes glowed like spring sprouts. With flower-soft skin and cherry-red lips, she was a vision of elegance he could never forget. Flustered under his father's watchful gaze, young Elric stammers out a flustered, blush-filled greeting. He bows awkwardly before the elegant Tyria, who calmly offers a soft, polite welcome to their shared future together. Standing together beneath the high chapel ceilings, the profound reality of their marriage washes over his young mind. Gazing at her through the delicate veil, Tyria's breathtaking grace and vivid green eyes instantly capture his heart. As he gently slips the wedding ring onto her slender finger, Elric struggles desperately to hide the goofy smile creeping onto his face, forcing a stiff scowl just to keep from bursting with uncontainable joy. Yet beneath her polite composure, Tyria's cold, detached gaze hints at a deeply hidden sorrow, leaving him completely oblivious to the pain he might be causing her. That night, heavy rain pours over the estate. Resting alone in his candlelit chamber, Elric quietly turns his new ring around his finger, unable to contain his quiet happiness. He marvels in awe that such a dignified, high-born woman has actually become his wife. Yet despite his delight, troubling questions begin to cloud his mind. Recalling his father's abrupt decree, he turns to the maid Rhonda, unable to comprehend why a noble family would ever marry their daughter to a simple merchant's son. Noticing Rhonda's visible hesitation, Elric earnestly begs her to reveal the truth behind the sudden arrangement. With a heavy, reluctant sigh, Rhonda breaks her silence and delivers a stark revelation that instantly shatters his fragile happiness. Rhonda reveals that the once illustrious barony of Wibben was drowning in overwhelming debt, facing total financial ruin. Seizing the opportunity, Elric's ambitious father agreed to clear their debts under one strict condition: a forced marriage that would elevate their simple merchant family into nobility. The devastating truth hits Elric with overwhelming force. Tyria had been traded away like a piece of property. Sickened with intense shame over his father's ruthless transaction, he collapses to his knees in complete anguish, unable to bear the thought of what had been done. Desperate to explain, apologize, and offer her any excuse he can summon, Elric bursts out of his room and sprints through the grand hallways. Panic grips his chest as his heart pounds furiously, driving him forward with frantic speed toward her quarters. Reaching her door, he leans heavily against the wall, completely out of breath and gasping for air. He struggles to gather his composure and steady his racing heart before he dares to face the gentle noblewoman resting inside. Reaching for the ornate door handle, Elric carefully cracks the heavy wooden doors open to peek inside. Muffled, heartbreaking sobs echo softly through the silent room, where he catches sight of Tyria curled up on the floor, weeping alone in deep sorrow. The sight of her tears completely shatters Elric's heart, filling him with profound guilt. Realizing that his sudden presence might only bring her further distress, the young boy hesitates in distress and slowly takes a cautious step backward, retreating into the hallway. Driven by a desperate resolve to free Tyria from this cruel transactional arrangement, young Elric vows to annul the forced marriage. Without hesitation, he storms down the quiet hall to his father's study and bursts through the heavy doors. Confronting his ruthless father face to face, Elric passionately begs him to call off the union. He tearfully demands to know if Tyria was merely sold off to save her family from ruin, desperately pleading for mercy, only for his father to coldly cut him off. Glaring down with terrifying malice, his father sternly commands him to stop acting like a child. He reminds Elric of their harsh new reality. They are nobles now, and he must act like one. His father's icy gaze leaves Elric silently shuddering, his fist clenching in helpless fury. Haunted by the painful truth that his mother died during his birth, Elric realizes he has spent his entire life enduring his father's bitter resentment. To the cold old man, he was never a son, only a convenient pawn to be manipulated for social ambition. Turning his back on his father, a sharp, unyielding determination ignites within the young boy. Realizing that he will never be anything more than an instrument of wealth in this cold house, he decides there is only one choice left. He must disappear completely. To spare the gentle girl who was traded away for money and completely destroy his father's grand designs, Elric cuts all ties. Gripping the door handle with fierce resolve, he vows to abandon the name Portman forever and vanish into the night. Stepping out into the pouring rain, young Elric wrestled with painful questions about Tyria's tears. He wondered if she was grieving her lost home, heartbroken over being sold like property, or simply repulsed by the prospect of being bound to him. Determined to break the cycle of misery, he steeled his heart and called out into the stormy night. It no longer mattered what she thought of him. He was abandoning everything and walking away for good. Arriving at a distant mercenary fortress, the young runaway stood before a battle-worn commander. Asked if he was truly ready for a mercenary's life, he raised his gaze with unyielding resolve and cast aside his true name, declaring himself Kasha. For 10 brutal years, the name Elric Portman ceased to exist. Swinging his blade with desperate ferocity, he carved a path through relentless bloodshed, eventually earning a formidable reputation as the sword demon, Kasha, a secret known only to the boy who ran away. High upon a barren cliffside painted in the fiery glow of a sunset sky, a solitary knight stands in unyielding silence. Encased in battle-worn armor, his dark hair catches the fading light while an intense glow shines within his vivid red eyes, harboring memories of endless conflict. Rank upon rank of heavily armored enemy soldiers form an impenetrable wall, their shields locked while spearmen and riflemen take aim. Standing alone against this terrifying vanguard, the warrior hesitates for only a moment before adjusting his gauntlet and tightening his grip around his heavy broadsword. He rushes forward like a whirlwind, unleashing a devastating slash that cleaves through the front lines in a brilliant arc of steel and crimson shadow. As the dust settles, fresh blood spatters across his cheek, but his unblinking gaze remains focused entirely on his survival. The passage of time shifts the scene to the warm interior of a quiet tavern, where soft chatter hums beneath timber beams. The chime of the entrance door catches the bartender off guard, prompting him to wipe his hands and call out a friendly greeting to the newly arrived traveler, resting on a cane. Dressed in refined traveling attire, the stranger steps into the golden light of the tavern with a slow, heavy limp. Leaning on his walking stick, he walks steadily past rows of wooden tables, carrying an air of quiet sorrow and authority that immediately turns every head in the room. Quiet hushes spread among the patrons as they recognize the formidable figure known throughout the realm as the Sword Demon. Surprised to see him return from the distant battlefield, they glance uneasily toward his limping leg, questioning what terrible encounter could have wounded a man famed for his absolute invincibility. Leaning his worn walking stick against the tavern counter, the quiet warrior settles into a wooden chair beneath the warm, ambient lights. As the attentive bartender sets down a wooden mug, he notes the traveler's visible limp and asks what terrible encounter left such a lasting mark. The swordsman merely brushes off the concern, calmly remarking that injuries are simply a common toll of the battlefield. Unfolding a freshly printed newspaper to pass the time, he quietly admits he will be living with his leg injury for a long while. But as his eyes scroll down the front page, his relaxed composure instantly vanishes. His fingers violently crumple the paper in a sudden surge of shock, startling the bartender as an intense, burning anger darkens the warrior's eyes. Tucked away as a small blurb at the edge of the newspaper is the obituary portrait of his father, Hoven Portman. Shaken by the news of his father's passing, the veteran knight boards an outbound steam train. Sitting alone inside the passenger carriage with his cane resting nearby, he stares thoughtfully through the glass as golden sunset light washes over the passing countryside. Watching the landscape blur past, he reflects on the face of the man he had resented so deeply for a decade. The sudden discovery brings back vivid memories of the night he fled home at just 14 years old. Marching into a heavy downpour with a single sword and bag, a naive, desperate part of his young heart had harbored a childish hope that his father might come looking for him. Turning back to gaze upon the massive, imposing family mansion under the torrential rain, he slowly accepted that no rescue would ever arrive. He had been raised not as a beloved son, but as a cold instrument to restore the household's lost honor, forced to endure an upbringing that ultimately drove his own mother to her death. Yet despite 10 long years of exile and resentment, he acknowledges one inescapable truth. No matter what transpired, he was still his father's child, finally making his journey home. Slumping back against the seat of the moving train, he quietly confronts the lingering hope he buried deep inside. That his father might have harbored even a shred of genuine affection. But acknowledging that affection was nothing more than a childish delusion, he accepts that the true target of his decade-long bitterness no longer exists. Only a weary wanderer remains, using his father's passing as a final pretext to face the place he once fled. Sparks fly as the train wheels grind heavily against the iron tracks, coming to a slow halt inside Wibbin Station beneath a grand glass canopy. Stepping onto the platform and into the open air, he leans on his wooden cane and gazes toward the golden horizon of his hometown, feeling the quiet magnitude of his long-awaited arrival. Navigating the familiar dirt paths, he marvels at a countryside seemingly untouched by the passage of 10 long years. Vibrant crimson autumn leaves shade the quiet streets, while local farmers pace leisurely with their harvests and young children dash past in play. Completely free from the sharp, terrifying tension that defined his years on the front lines. With every uneven step echoing along the dirt road, a rare, faint smile softens the veteran swordsman's weary expression. He pauses at the edge of the vast, glowing wheat fields that serve as the proud symbol of the Wibbin estate, marveling at how perfectly preserved the land has remained while he fought to survive. Watching the breeze sweep across the grain brings back fond memories of his youth before everything broke apart. He vividly remembers playing hide-and-seek among the stalks with village friends and running back home covered in mud, earning an affectionate scolding from the housemaid for ruining his clean clothes. Yet as those vibrant fragments of his past flood his mind with every step, the emotional weight begins to settle heavily upon his heart. Whispering softly to himself, his limping stride suddenly comes to a complete halt right in the center of the path, catching a glimpse of something unexpected. Pausing along the quiet path, the weary swordsman turns his thoughts back to the gentle young bride he abandoned on their wedding night a decade ago. Looking back, he convinces himself that a woman of such extraordinary beauty must have surely moved on with her life, finding happiness and marrying someone else by now. A sudden cry echoing across the fields shatters his peaceful reverie. Turning around in shock, he spots a housemaid fussing over a graceful woman carrying a heavy bundle of freshly harvested wheat. Speechless, his breath catches as he softly utters the name Tyria into the warm sunset air. As the maid hurriedly steps aside in surprise, the noble woman turns toward him beneath her wide straw hat. Bathed in the radiant amber light, her striking green eyes meet his, leaving him completely bewildered as to how his abandoned wife could possibly still be living here on the estate after all these years. Surrounded by swaying golden wheat beneath the quiet autumn sky, the battle-worn knight and his forgotten bride stand just paces apart, gazing silently into each other's eyes. After 10 long years of exile, regret, and endless war, time seems to stand completely still as their long-separated paths finally cross again. Standing face to face beneath the golden sunset sky, he stammers in confusion, asking why she is out in the field. She gazes back with calm composure, quietly asking why he has returned after all these years, before leaving no doubt by declaring that she is his wedded wife. A heavy wave of self-reproach washes over him as he confronts his own foolishness. He had naively believed that vanishing 10 years ago would automatically annul their marriage, forgetting that a union bound by debt and necessity could never be dissolved so easily. He agonizes over whether his impulsive escape ended up robbing her of her final shred of freedom, trapping her in a symbolic cage. As he looks at her quiet posture and stoic expression, remorse grips him for deserting the woman he married. Admitting to himself that he was a selfish coward who failed to protect even his own pride, he reflects on their past. While he spent those years swinging a sword across blood-drenched battlefields, she was left behind to endure absolute solitude. He imagines her lonely nights spent staring out cold windows, wondering just how difficult and painful life was for her all alone. Standing in the middle of the wheat field, he firmly resolves that he must offer her a sincere apology. Hesitating before the woman who waited, he stammers awkwardly, desperately wondering if he even possesses the right to offer an apology. Yet as he struggles to find his words, she remains entirely composed, gazing back at him with silent, unreadable calm. Without showing a single flicker of bitterness, she calmly suggests that they head inside for now. As she turns and leads the way through the golden field, he trails along behind her, his chest heavy with unsaid thoughts and deep hesitation. In truth, he wishes she had at least vented her rage, or yelled at him for his decade-long disappearance. Her gentle composure only unsettles him more, leaving him agonizing over what she could possibly expect from the coward who ran away. A sudden shock of apprehension snaps him out of his spiraling thoughts, forcing him to freeze abruptly mid-step. He stands completely motionless on the dirt path, wide-eyed with anxiety as distance opens up between them beneath the glowing sunset. Noticing that he has paused in place, she turns back around and softly asks if he is coming along. Swallowing his hesitation and tightening his hand on his cane, he quietly answers that he is right behind her. Limping steadily with every step of his cane, he follows her along the path through the rustling wheat field, walking toward the grand mansion lit by the fading evening light. Before stepping inside, she gently asks him to wait right there while she goes to fetch the butler. He stands silently in the glowing sunset, watching her walk through the grand entrance, his heart heavy with lingering hesitation as distance opens between them once more. Turning his eyes up toward the grand estate, he marvels at how completely unchanged it remains after 10 long years. From the rows of windows to the weathered stone pillars, every single detail comes rushing back to him vividly, bringing a subtle, bittersweet smile to his lips. His quiet reflection is suddenly broken when a maid steps outside, pausing in surprise before politely asking who he is and whom he has come to see on the grounds. Recognizing her immediately, he calls out Rhonda's name with a gentle smile, asking if she truly does not recognize him. The maid looks back in quiet confusion, struggling to place the voice of the man before her. Her eyes suddenly widen in shock as realization hits. Staring in disbelief at the grown man standing before her, she gasps out his name, breathlessly asking if he is truly young Master Elric returned at last. Without another word, he pulls his loyal servant into a warm embrace, gently reassuring her that he has finally returned home. Overcome with emotion, Rhonda clings to him with tears in her eyes, marveling at how much he has changed over 10 long years. Smiling gently at Rhonda, he admits that after 10 long years on the battlefield, it is only natural she failed to recognize him. But right in the middle of his sentence, a sudden shock of realization hits him like a heavy blow. He snaps around in surprise, leaving Rhonda startled and asking if something is wrong. After all, if the maid who raised him like family could not recognize him at once, an unsettling question begins to consume his mind. Flashbacks of his wife, standing amidst the wheat, rush back into his head. Cold sweat breaks out across his forehead as he wonders how she could possibly recognize him at a single glance after 10 years. Staring up at the towering mansion, he remains entirely oblivious to the secret observer upstairs. Framed by fluttering lace curtains, his wife stands by the window, quietly looking down at him and Rhonda in the courtyard below. As his gaze unexpectedly shifts upward toward the house, she gasps and quickly steps back out of sight. Pressing a hand against her chest to steady her pounding heart, she exhales softly in the dim silence. In her mind, the lingering details of his presence remain vividly clear. The distinct scar on the back of his neck, his familiar brown hair, and the unmistakable gaze she carried in her memory for 10 long years. Soaking in a warm bath inside the mansion, Elric marvels at how completely unchanged his old home remains after a decade away. Yet, even as the steam soothes his weary body, he remains deeply puzzled, unable to fathom how his wife Tyria recognized him at a single glance. Stepping out of the bath and pulling on a white bathrobe, a sudden movement catches him off guard. He turns around and freezes in utter astonishment to find Tyria standing right there inside the steamy room, wrapped in nothing but a short bath towel. Overwhelmed by embarrassment, Tyria tightly clutches the towel to her chest, her face turning bright red. As tears of flustered confusion pool in her eyes, she stammers out an apology, struggling to keep her composure in front of him. Desperate to soothe her distress, Elric steps closer and gently places his hand on her cheek, pleading with her not to cry. But the sudden intimacy startles her completely, prompting her to let out a loud, piercing scream that echoes down the hallway. Hearing the sharp cry, a nearby maid drops her laundry basket in shock. She sprints frantically down the corridor and bursts through the double doors, terrified that something awful has happened to her lady. The maid stops dead in her tracks, wide-eyed with disbelief. Standing at the doorway, she catches young Master Elric in his bathrobe, holding his blushing, towel-wrapped wife tightly in his arms as both of them stare back in total shock. Blushing intensely, Tyria tearfully calls out to the maid as Elric stammers in a panic, trying to explain that he only grabbed her to prevent a fall. Yet his nervous excuses do little to undo the compromising scene. At the Chevor border defense line, the 5th Regiment of Guards stands arrayed against the Imperial Army's elite assault team. Standing at the forefront is LeBron, a ruthless vanguard knight whose sinister grin promises immediate slaughter. The border guards charge forward with desperate shouts, hoping to cut him down. Yet LeBron slashes through their front line with brutal ease, instantly crushing their morale as the terrified survivors panic and cry out in horror. As desperate calls to retreat sound across the field, a calm, brown-haired swordsman quietly steps forward against the tide of fleeing men. The Imperial soldiers watch in contempt, dismissing him as nothing more than mercenary scum. Completely unbothered by their taunts, the young man brings his longsword up into a practiced high guard. LeBron lunges forward with a savage attack, but the youth expertly parries the heavy strike without retreating an inch. In a single fluid motion, he shifts into a lightning-fast counterattack, slashing cleanly across LeBron's neck. Blood spurts instantly, forcing the proud vanguard knight down onto his knees in shock and agony. With one last decisive swing, the young warrior severs LeBron's head, leaving it to tumble across the dirt before the silent, utterly stunned Imperial Army. As the enemy soldiers freeze in sheer disbelief, the young warrior looks down over the fallen knight. He boldly declares himself as Kasha, a mercenary knight of Chevor, daring the remaining Imperial forces to step forward and face his sword. Before anyone can react, sharp instinct warns him of an unseen threat. He desperately summons a mana shield, but an incoming projectile pierces cleanly through his leg, bringing him down to his knees in shock and pain. Gritting his teeth against the sudden wound, Kasha looks toward the cliffs above the battlefield. There, silhouetted against the sky, 2 mysterious goggled snipers calmly observe the impact of their strike. With a gasp of terror, his eyes snap open as he bolts upright in bed. Sweating heavily, he clutches a drawn dagger against his chest, still trembling from the vivid memory of that fatal battlefield. His heavy breathing gradually slows as he looks around the peaceful, sunlit room. Taking in the elegant decor, he reminds himself that his long decade of mercenary exile is over, and he has returned home. A sudden knock at the door instantly triggers his battle instincts, making him grip his dagger in defense. When a servant softly asks if he is awake, he relaxes slightly and calls back. Shaking off the lingering terror of his nightmare, Kasha reassures the servant outside that he is awake. Fulfilling his request for cold wash water, a maid promptly attends to his bedside with a brimmed basin. Dressed in fine garments, he inspects his reflection while leaning heavily on a cane. This lavish comfort feels entirely undeserved, and when he tries to smile, his stern expression only reminds him of how much war has changed him. The head maid warmly compliments his neat attire, noting how much better he looks before inviting him down to begin the morning with breakfast. When she notices his severe limp and inquires about the injury, Kasha quickly invents a story about falling down a rocky hill, concealing his brutal battlefield gunshot wound to avoid causing unnecessary worry. As they cross the hallway, delicate footsteps announce a graceful presence. His wife turns toward him with a warm blush, softly asking if he managed to sleep well. Her gentle greeting instantly revives the mortifying memory of their unexpected bathhouse encounter, sending a vivid blush across his face as he stammers in sheer embarrassment. Before he can compose himself, a dramatic younger maid loudly accuses him of peeping in the bathhouse, prompting the head maid to swiftly smack her head for causing a scene. As the head maid drags the noisy servant away, Kasha nervously clears his throat. He offers his wife a polite morning greeting, desperate to gloss over the awkward tension between them. Taking his seat at the dining table, Kasha casually asks about the new maid, Marie. But the moment his wife addresses the maid's pervert accusation, he flusteredly insists it is no trouble at all. Gripping his cane tightly, a flushed Kasha murmurs that he was simply curious about an unfamiliar face around the mansion. His wife listens softly, quietly accepting his flustered defense. A fragile calm settles over the bright dining room as they share a peaceful breakfast together, silently enjoying the quiet morning side by side. Gathering his courage, Kasha speaks up to address yesterday's incident. His wife's eyes widen, her cheeks instantly flushing red as she realizes he is bringing up their unexpected bathhouse encounter. Before Kasha can offer a sincere apology, his wife flusteredly interrupts to reassure him that it is completely all right, urging him to focus on his meal instead. Beneath the surface, her hands fidget nervously while a vivid blush lingers on her face. Struggling with his own lingering embarrassment, Kasha rubs his neck and softly calls out to her. Sitting across from him, his wife silently recalls the severe scars covering his chest, wondering what harsh life he endured to survive. Meanwhile, Kasha inwardly squirms with regret for bringing up the bath incident, desperate to escape the suffocating tension. Unable to take the heavy silence any longer, Kasha furiously shovels food into his mouth. Chewing frantically, he hastily offers an awkward thumbs up and excuses himself from the breakfast table. As he turns to leave, his wife softly calls after him. Her cheeks flush with a tender blush as she gently wishes him a pleasant day. Stepping out into the hallway, Kasha sits in the bustling main hall while staff tend to the manor. Guided by Rhonda, the servants bow respectfully and warmly welcome their long-absent young master home. Yet gossip travels quickly through the household. The male servants teasingly praise him for trying to pounce on his wife, while the outspoken maid Marie indignantly declares him a pervert. Marie loudly scolds everyone for defending him, insisting 10 years of absence makes his actions unacceptable. Before the head staff grab her to keep her quiet, the elderly butler chuckles knowingly and tells her she is far too young to understand, reminding her that producing an heir is a noble's primary duty. The butler passionately defends Kasha's actions as a noble duty to produce an heir, ignoring Marie's protests. As the staff cheer him on, a thoroughly flustered Kasha can only offer a weak, nervous smile. Gripping his cane tightly, Kasha inwardly admits that he remains undecided about his future. Though his knee injury anchors him here for now, he struggles to feel worthy of leading the estate after 10 long years away. Eager to escape the overwhelming attention, Kasha cuts the conversation short and asks the butler to prepare a carriage so he can take his leave for the morning. As the carriage rolls down the sunlit path, his wife stands quietly in the golden wheat field beneath a wide hat, her gaze following him as he rides past the sprawling estate. Arriving at a hill overlooking the manor, Kasha steps out into the soft autumn breeze. Standing before a solitary tombstone, he gazes quietly down at his father's grave, offering a long overdue greeting. Returning home after 10 long years of self-imposed exile, he stands alone before his father's grave beneath the vast autumn sky. The deep resentment he harbored for a decade slowly melts into a heavy, unexpected sorrow over a reunion he never wished to face in such silence. His father, Hovan Portman, was a ruthless pioneer who raised their merchant clan into Wibben's premier guild through cold ambition. Staring down at the silent stone, he asks if his father ever spared a single warm word or smile for him, wishing the cold man had lived just a bit longer. Softening his gaze under the bright sky, he admits to the quiet grave that he no longer resents him as he once did. Setting aside that heavy burden, he turns around to call for his father's longtime butler, Aldio. Aldio approaches quietly, revealing that the old master secretly suffered from a severe heart ailment until the end. As his final days drew near, the father poured all his remaining strength into winding down and liquidating his vast business empire. A faint, wry smile touches his lips as he wonders out loud what could have kept the old butler so devoted to such a cold-blooded man. Aldio merely grins with an easy smile, admitting candidly that he served him entirely for the money. Aldio gently points out that the young master hasn't yet inquired about his late father's estate. In his final months, the ruthless patriarch liquidated every merchant asset into vast chests of coin and signed contracts, secretly bequeathing the entire fortune directly to his estranged son. As their carriage rides beneath the glowing autumn canopy, he gazes out the window and asks whether his father left behind a personal will. Aldio admits the old patriarch left only strict written instructions for the estate, organizing his final affairs with cold, dispassionate efficiency. Grasping his cane tightly as golden wheat fields pass outside, his thoughts drift back to the young bride he abandoned on their wedding night. He wonders why she still resides at the family mansion, assuming a 10-year disappearance would have naturally annulled their arrangement. Aldio turns back to remind him that their marriage was never born of warmth, but was a calculated political alliance negotiated between families. To his late father, it was nothing more than a cold business transaction, carefully disguised as a matrimonial union. The old butler then reveals one final crucial detail. The Portman family was recently granted a hereditary barony. As the carriage wheels grind to a firm halt outside the estate, Aldio stresses that the noble title and immense inheritance belong entirely to him, rather than his waiting wife. Stepping from the carriage before the mansion, he points out that a full year has passed since his father's death. Had wealth been her motive, she could have claimed the estate and left, making her choice to stay intentional. Wondering what bound her to this home, he asks why she remained. Aldio admits the young mistress was always soft-spoken and distant, carrying an aloof nobility that kept the household staff from ever truly knowing her. He chuckles dryly, calling her a complete stranger he has seen only once. Yet Aldio gently reminds him that every marriage begins with two unfamiliar souls. Limping up the entrance steps, he freezes as a quiet figure comes into view. Standing by a marble pillar in a broad straw hat, his abandoned wife holds a brown bundle close. Beneath her wide brim, a soft blush warms her features. Her hands nervously press against her dress, her wedding ring catching the sun as she stands in silent hesitation. Breaking the 10-year silence, he softly asks when she arrived. She quietly answers that she has just returned from her walk in the golden wheat fields. Looking up at him with timid yellow eyes, her soft blush sends a sudden wave of heat to his cheeks, catching him entirely off guard. Recomposing himself, he offers to go inside together. With a gentle nod, she agrees, and side by side, husband and wife finally enter the grand mansion. Walking side by side through the grand entryway, he struggles to break the heavy silence, acutely self-conscious of his awkward attempts at conversation. Looking closely at her refined profile beneath the wide straw hat, he realizes her quiet, distant nobility remains completely unchanged from their wedding night 10 years ago. Lost in these lingering memories, his foot suddenly catches on the floor, causing him to stumble awkwardly. Catching himself with his cane as she turns with a startled gasp of concern, he flusteredly brushes it off, deeply embarrassed to have displayed such clumsiness right in front of her. As they climb the grand marble staircase together, he apologizes that his bad leg prevents him from carrying her heavy bundle, feeling a sudden pang of shame for offering late courtesies after a decade of abandonment. Softly, she clarifies that she is well accustomed to hard work, having learned the estate's management directly from the patriarch. He sighs softly, knowing his father never rested until he personally verified every single detail with his own eyes. Recalling how the old man even inspected the sprawling wheat fields himself, he realizes why his father liquidated every major merchant venture, leaving only this single wheat farm and entrusting its complete oversight to her. Halting his steps in the quiet corridor, he pauses with a quiet hesitation before turning to face her. Looking up at the massive portrait of the late patriarch hanging solemnly on the wall, he softly asks how his father spent his final days. Softly looking down beneath her hat, she admits she learned estate work directly from the late patriarch, though nothing beyond that. Tightening his grip on his cane, he hesitatingly asks if his father ever spoke of him. With a quiet tilt of her head, she answers that he never did. He realizes that between a cold-hearted father and a soft-spoken woman, any exchange would have been strictly business. Gazing back up at the solemn portrait, he quietly accepts the silence. When she excuses herself to finish her daily duties, he is startled to learn she reviews estate documents by night after working the wheat fields by day. Blushing gently, she confirms her relentless routine before taking her leave until dinner. Watching her depart, a heavy wave of guilt crushes him. He abandoned his own inheritance to live in self-imposed exile, leaving her to bear every single burden alone. It would ease his conscience if she resented him, yet she never uttered a single complaint. Limping down the corridor, a sudden loud crash interrupts his heavy thoughts. Turning around, he finds a young maid sprawled across the marble floor, frantically trying to gather dozens of scattered letters and fallen boxes. Ignoring his injured leg, he stoops down to help her gather the fallen envelopes. As he picks up a stack of sealed letters, he curiously asks what they are all for. The maid explains that all the fallen envelopes are letters addressed directly to the lady of the house. Picking one up, he marvels at the massive stack of correspondence she receives. Suddenly, his eyes widen in shock as his gaze falls upon a wax-sealed envelope inscribed to his beloved daughter Tinia. Seeing the family's shadow, he realizes with a jolt that she comes from Wibben. Sitting alone at his desk, he unfolds a letter written to Tyria by her father. The message pleads with her to give up waiting for a husband who left 10 years ago, urging her to leave behind the hardship and return home. His late father had liquidated all of the Portman family assets and transferred them into his daughter's name alone, leaving the woman who labored 10 long years without a single cent to show for it. She had every right to feel resentful and take everything for herself. As he rests the letter on the desk, he wonders if she only remained at the estate to claim the inheritance, yet the thought leaves him uneasy. If her true motive was money, why would she work endlessly in the wheat fields? She could have easily claimed the entire fortune a year ago, yet she chose to stay behind. Reaching down, he opens his desk drawer to find a stack of wax-sealed envelopes. Just as he suspected, letters addressed to Tyria had been arriving continuously for over a year. Each letter pressed her to claim the inheritance set aside for him, with some even begging for a simple response. Yet she never replied to a single one, choosing instead to lock them away in secret. A soft sigh breaks the quiet room as the realization settles over him. She wasn't seeking personal gain at all. All this time she was guarding his family legacy for a master whose return was never guaranteed. Looking out toward the golden wheat field, he realizes Tyria kept the entire situation hidden from everyone, fighting this burden alone for a full year. Even if she had claimed the entire inheritance, he knew he had no right to blame her, leaving him to ponder why she chose such a difficult life. Meanwhile, inside her elegant bedroom, Tyria sits quietly before the vanity mirror. She carefully ties a delicate white ribbon into her blonde hair, primping with calm, effortless grace as she prepares for what comes next. Suddenly, her enthusiastic maid bursts into the room in pure excitement, announcing that the young master requested to see Tyria first. Despite calling his past behavior disgraceful, the maid wildly insists that producing an heir is the absolute best outcome for her mistress. Dropping to her knees and clutching Tyria's dress tightly, the maid tearfully calls him a scoundrel who might flee again. With intense desperation, she passionately urges Tyria to hurry, share a bed with him, and produce a child immediately. Tyria can only offer an awkward, bewildered smile, while her maid continuously rambles about future children, insisting that every single baby must take after Tyria so they won't grow up to be runaways. Before the maid can continue her absurd fantasies, a sharp knock resounds at the heavy bedroom doors. Both women freeze instantly, turning in suspense toward the entrance as someone waits outside. Guided by the butler, Tyria nervously makes her way down the grand hallway. She wonders what business the young master could possibly have with her, as this marks the very first time he has ever requested a private meeting. As the heavy double doors are pulled open, Tyria enters the sunlit room to find him waiting. He softly welcomes her inside, and she bows respectfully before approaching the tea table with quiet, measured grace. Taking a slow sip from his teacup, he sits opposite her in the vast room. A heavy stillness fills the space between them as they prepare to finally confront the secrets long kept hidden. Placing a wax-sealed envelope onto the floral tablecloth, He apologizes for opening the letters after discovering them among the mail. Tyria gasps in sheer surprise, her breath catching as she realizes what lies before him. Dread settles deeply in her heart as she lowers her head in distress. She agonizes over his perception of her, terrified that he will mistake her motives and view her as a shameless woman pursuing wealth. Instead of offering judgment, he admits he learned she ignored those letters for a full year. He asks why she protected his inheritance when his return was never guaranteed, pointing out she had every right to take it. Though sitting at the same table, they remain total strangers, divided by years of silence. With her hands tightly clutching her dress on her lap, he pushes further, asking why she refused to return home to Wibben. With absolute conviction, Tyria firmly declares that she is no longer the Lady of Wibben, but the mistress of Portman. Offering a polite apology, she gracefully rises from the tea table, insisting she has pressing work to attend to. He can only sit in complete silence as she turns and walks out of the grand drawing room. Her sudden departure leaves him stunned, completely unprepared for her dignified strength and refusal to elaborate. His mind turns back to her overwhelming emotion when he asked why she guarded his legacy. With tears welling in her eyes and her face flushed red, she had offered him her sole, undeniable truth. She stayed because she is his wife. Sitting alone in his study, he tightly grips a letter opener, while pondering her fierce declaration of duty. Her words echo repeatedly in his mind, forcing him to reconsider everything he believed about the woman who waited for his return. Plunging the knife into his desk, he realizes her endless labor was never motivated by wealth or greed. She endured years of solitude and heavy estate burdens solely out of a noble woman's unshakable responsibility to protect the Portman legacy. Her selfless dedication reminds him of someone from his past, Elvis Graham. He first encountered the noble knight on the blood-stained battlefield, back when he was a rising mercenary hired by Elvis's family to fight in a relentless territorial war. Although the territorial war ended in victory, the noble knight Elvis Graham was left permanently crippled. He proudly maintained that those born into nobility must carry the weight of responsibility, using the battlefield as a stage to fulfill their sacred duty. When reminded of his mixed commoner lineage, Elvis dryly joked that sacrificing half his body fulfilled his half of noble responsibility. He claimed it earned him the right to retire peacefully from battle and spend his remaining years in quiet comfort. Plunging a blade into the wooden wall of his study, the young master acknowledges that he can never truly repay Tyria for the 10 long years she sacrificed. Even so, he refuses to remain powerless while she carries the weight alone. Knowing persistent letters coveting the inheritance will continue to arrive, he realizes Tyria's family never once visited during her year of silence. He suspects circumstances prevent them from coming in person rather than a simple lack of will. Recognizing that Tyria will never willingly expose her inner thoughts or private pain, he resolves to uncover the truth on his own. Stepping into a carriage, he departs to investigate the mystery surrounding her family. After a long journey, he finally arrives outside the grand gilded gates of the Wibben estate. Standing before her former home, he prepares to uncover the secrets her family has hidden behind their endless demands. Stepping out of the carriage, he gazes up at the grand Wibben estate, determined to take a direct approach to uncover the truth behind her family. Outside the grand estate, bitter whispers greet Elric's sudden arrival. Walking through the halls, his in-laws vent their fury, condemning his low-born origin and suspecting he has returned solely to greedily lay claim to the family inheritance. As they march down the gilded hallway, their resentment only grows stronger. They brand him a money-obsessed wretch, calculating the heavy financial burden and effort spent raising their daughter Tyria during his 10-year absence. Fixated on claiming Hoven's inheritance to balance their accounts, the father strides forward with clenched fists. He turns the brass handle and opens the door, revealing Elric Portman standing tall with his walking cane. Inside the parlor, Elric offers a courteous bow, introducing himself as Elric Portman and apologizing for taking so long to greet them. His in-laws deliver cold, sarcastic remarks before Elric directly addresses the letter sent to his estate. The father scoffs at Elric's delayed response, eager to speed up the negotiation. He hides his greed behind a facade of parental duty, claiming he sent the message out of genuine worry for his daughter after 10 years of abandonment. Across the elegant tea table, Tyria's father mockingly brings up Elric's humble commoner origins and physical frailty, claiming he lacks the ability to manage the Portman family estate. He bluntly demands the entire inheritance as rightful payment for leaving Tyria abandoned for a decade. Insisting that Elric would only squander the wealth, Tyria's mother peeks from behind her fan, lamenting the emotional distress her daughter endured alone. Together, the scheming in-laws argue that taking full control of the fortune is the only proper way to put it to good use. Listening to their absurd justifications, Elric's faint sigh turns into a glare of intense disgust. He sees completely through their righteous facade, recognizing that they harbor no genuine concern for their daughter and only seek to seize the land and gold to line their own pockets. Finding their greed unbearable, Elric clasps his hands tightly over the table and serenely interrupts. Ignoring their demanding tone, he begins by offering a courteous apology for arriving without his wife, explaining that Tirva is currently busy attending to her daily household duties. Enraged by Elric's calm attempt to shift the topic, the father slams his heavy hand onto the table and yells in frustration. He fiercely accuses Elric of being selfish, demanding he immediately surrender the inheritance after abandoning the estate for 10 full years. Hearing himself branded as the greedy one after enduring their relentless demands, Elric rests his head in his hand and lets out a dark, disbelieving laugh. Elric's sharp red eyes glare with dangerous intensity as he directly challenges Lord Joseph, asking what he will do if Elric actually decides to embrace the greed he was accused of. Stunned by the bold defiance, the father falters in utter shock as Elric mockingly taunts his sudden silence. Exploding in fury, the father slams his hand hard against the table and leaps to his feet. Veins bulging with rage, he screams at Elric, fiercely cursing him as an insolent and shameless wretch for daring to speak back. Unfazed by the loud display, Elric's gaze grows lethal. Flashbacks of his 10 brutal years surviving on blood-soaked battlefields remind him that loud rage and dramatic gestures are utterly pointless, as war taught him that true strength needs no excessive drama. Elric coldly advises his father-in-law to keep his mouth shut if he wants to continue receiving whatever financial payments he currently enjoys. Smirking arrogantly, Elric points out that Tyria is the true heir, making their greedy demands completely laughable. Turning his back on his stunned in-laws, Elric bluntly tells them that they are the ones driven by overwhelming greed. As the father screams desperate threats to storm the Portman estate, Elric nonchalantly glances back, promising he will be waiting. Departing from the grand estate, Elric rides along the peaceful, tree-lined path inside his private carriage. Shielded from their prying eyes, the weary husband finally lets his composed mask slip, resting his face in his hand with an exhausted sigh. Riding away in isolation, Elric becomes deeply consumed by bitter self-doubt, wondering if he is really any different from his shameless in-laws. As past arguments echo in his mind, he questions whether he spoke up back there for Tyria's sake, or if he only sought a rush of satisfaction from crushing them into submission. Haunted by memories of his father-in-law's harsh demands and comparing his own selfishness to his father's past mistakes, the overwhelming wave of disgust turns Elric's stomach. Hearing sick gagging noises from inside, the driver pulls the coach to a sudden stop. Elric staggers out into the open air and braces his hand against the carriage wall, leaning over in pain as nausea completely overtakes him. Breathing heavily as his body trembles, Elric slumps helplessly against the side of the coach in the wheat field. Looking down, he mutters a bitter confession, calling himself a truly wretched, hopeless human being. A soft rustling sound amidst the nearby crops cuts through his despair. Elric turns his head with a startled glance, his red eyes widening in quiet astonishment as he looks toward the tall, golden wheat. Standing quietly among the wheat, illuminated by the warm sunlight, a young woman gazes across the open landscape. Elric steps out from beside his carriage, standing frozen as he takes in the unexpected sight. With her long golden hair braided beneath a modest white headscarf, Tyria stands peaceful in the sunlight, looking just as breathtakingly beautiful as the day he fled 10 years ago. Softly uttering Tyria's name, Elric breaks into an urgent sprint across the dirt path, racing through the tall golden wheat. Driven by a crushing wave of remorse, he agonizes over how deeply she must have suffered over the past decade because of her greedy parents, his late father, and his own cowardly flight. Rushing straight past his bewildered butler and maid, Elric reaches the sunlit field and desperately reaches out, grasping Tyria's hand. Devastated by the realization that everyone in her life has brought her nothing but pain, he bends low before his startled wife, holding her hand tightly as she gasps in surprise. Bowing low in the open, sunlit clearing, Elric offers a heart-wrenching apology straight from his soul. He humbly begs for her forgiveness, taking full responsibility for leaving her isolated for 10 long years, while hypocritically trying to justify his own selfish actions as if they were for her benefit. Clutching her hands as he bows his head deeply before her, Elric tearfully confesses that every single hardship she endured during his long absence was entirely his fault. Tyria gazes down at him with wide, golden-green eyes, thoroughly stunned by his raw, emotional surrender. A young boy bravely rushes in with a wooden stick to drive off a pack of attacking beasts, standing between the creatures and a timid girl holding a parasol. After chasing them away, he turns to ask if she is unhurt, only to freeze when he discovers a deep bleeding wound torn into his own leg. Outraged by his injury, he shouts in pain, but the shy girl softly asks him to sit still for a moment. Kneeling beside him, she gently wraps a neat bandage over his wound as he introduces himself as Elric Portman, insisting that he did not help her just to earn her thanks. Surrounded by the quiet forest sunlight, Elric watches her tend to him and wonders why she is so quiet. Brimming with pride, he tells her it would be wise to stay on his good side, declaring with confidence that he is destined to become a royal knight. Once she finishes tying the knot, Elric looks down at the skilled bandaging with genuine gratitude and asks where a noble lady learned such care. She whispers a reply about her nanny, but when he demands she speak up, she turns flushed and silent under his intense gaze. Shaking his head, Elric warns that her timid personality will make it impossible for her to ever get married. Blushing furiously, he suddenly blurted out that he would take her as his bride once he becomes a royal knight, leaving her wide-eyed with a fluttering heart. Overwhelmed by embarrassment at her silence, Elric defensively shouts that he only offered because of her healing skills. He storms down the path, shouting that she will be desperate to marry him in the future, while she walks away with a soft, blushing smile. Looking down at the small portrait of young Elric, she softly reminisces about his grand childhood dream of becoming a royal knight. Though his path took a different course, a gentle smile touches her lips as she wonders if meeting him again after 10 long years could truly be fate. As sunset casts a warm, golden glow across the estate, a maid quietly guides her down the silent hallway. Remembering how troubled Elric looked earlier, a quiet anxiety creeps into her heart as she wonders why he has suddenly requested to meet her alone. After being announced at the doorway, she steps inside and sits across from Elric in the grand room. The atmosphere between them feels heavy and tense, and when she hesitantly attempts to break the silence, he remains still, lost in his own conflicted thoughts. Interpreting her hesitation, Elric looks down and takes a deep breath, explaining that he summoned her for a crucial reason. Lowering his head, he utters a deeply sincere apology, leaving her completely stunned by his unexpected admission. He confesses that he has carried guilt for leaving her behind on their wedding night 10 years ago. Looking back, he admits his younger self was utterly foolish and impulsive, acting recklessly, without considering the consequences of running away. Recognizing the painful solitude and burdens she must have endured all alone in his absence, Elric fixes his gaze on her, asking in a soft, vulnerable tone if she could ever find it in her heart to accept his apology. Her response catches him completely off guard as she quietly insists he has nothing to apologize for. Flushing slightly, she explains that remaining at the mansion all these years was entirely her own decision, and she has never held a single grudge against him. Knowing that carrying his lingering guilt would only keep him from finding peace, she looks up with a tender, reassuring smile and officially accepts his apology. Relief washes over Elric as his guarded expression softens, bringing a rare, warm smile to his face as he sincerely thanks her. As they walk side by side across the polished floors of the grand estate, she gently inquires if his injured leg has begun to heal. He reassures her that he is doing fine, though a touch of embarrassment creeps into his tone as he apologizes for keeping her from her busy day. Hesitating in her steps, she turns to him with cheeks flushed pink, shyly asking if he would consider calling her by something warmer than just a formal title. But as her voice trails off into an unintelligible murmur, Elric leans in closer, thoroughly bewildered by what she is trying to convey. Just as she attempts to speak, the maid suddenly barges into the room, announcing tea time with cheerful energy. Caught entirely off guard by the sudden noise, Elric loses his balance, loses his grip on his cane, and stumbles wildly forward, crashing directly on top of her onto the floor. Catching them locked together on the carpet, the house butler teasingly remarks that they seem to be making plans for a future heir. Mortified beyond measure, Elric desperately attempts to push himself up to deny the absurd claim, only to awkwardly fumble and trigger another wave of chaotic panic. Amused by the spectacle, the butler promptly covers the maid's eyes and cheekily promises to warn the rest of the staff never to interrupt their private moments. Completely red-faced and flustered, Elric throws up his hands, frantically protesting that the entire situation is nothing more than a terrible misunderstanding. Flushed and breathless beneath him on the carpet, she softly asks if he can step aside for a moment, prompting a mortified Elric to stammer out a frantic apology. Watching from the doorway, the sly butler cheekily tells them to take their time before shutting the door, leaving Elric shouting in absolute helpless frustration. His desperate cries of denial echo across the grand mansion grounds late into the night. When morning breaks, bright sunlight streams through the tall windows as Elric awakens inside his room, warmly greeting his maid Runda with a calm and refreshed smile. Teasing him with a mischievous smirk, Runda notes that he seems in remarkably good spirits, playfully whispering a scandalous rumor about an upcoming young heir. Flustered to his core, Elric sits up defensively on his bed, shouting that the butler's wild claims are entirely false, while Runda chuckles at his dramatic outrage. Her playful demeanor fades as she sternly insists that last night's events cannot be brushed aside as a simple accident. Reminding him that 10 long years of abandonment carry an agonizing weight for a young lady, Runda looms over him with intense conviction, firmly warning him never to make Lady Tyria feel lonely ever again. Meanwhile, inside her sunlit bedroom, Lady Tyria quietly stirs awake with a soft, radiant smile, feeling far more refreshed than usual. Holding the cherished picture frame tenderly against her chest, she rests peacefully upon her grand bed. Gazing fondly down at the portrait of young Elric, she softly whispers a morning greeting to his childhood image before setting the frame gently onto her nightstand. Overflowing with joy that the emotional distance between them has finally begun to narrow, she stretches gracefully in the warm sunlight, wondering with a fluttering heart if she should start greeting her master in person every single morning. Morning arrives with a heavy, cautious quiet over breakfast, where every scrape of a fork echoes across the long dining table. As she quietly enjoys her meal, he struggles to keep his composure, his mind trapped in the lingering embarrassment and intense closeness of yesterday's intimate moment. Even sitting across from her feels overwhelmingly nerve-wracking. When she softly breaks the silence to ask if he would accompany her on an outing today, he practically jumps out of his seat in flustered surprise. Flushing beneath his gaze, she nervously stammers out an explanation, clarifying that with the Harvest Festival right around the corner, an estate inspection is needed, and it only makes sense now that he has returned. The mention of the upcoming Harvest Festival instantly eases the remaining tension in his chest. Softening his expression into a warm, reassuring smile, he gladly promises to accompany her wherever she needs to go. A gentle, relieved blush washes over her face, deeply comforted by his kind and willing response. Inside the estate, the maids carefully fit her into an elegant dark dress for the walk outside. Satisfied with her mistress's appearance, Rhonda steps out into the hallway to check on the young master's outfit, fully expecting him to be properly prepared. However, the instant she lays eyes on him, her affectionate smile completely turns into cold, strict disapproval. Dressed head to toe in a broad rogue's hat, brown vest and boots, he glibly argues that no outfit could possibly be more practical or efficient for an outdoor inspection. Refusing to let her master wander out dressed like a wandering mercenary, Rhonda sternly scolds him, and gives chase down the corridor while he frantically scrambles away. Cornering him inside the room, Rhonda firmly insists that a nobleman must dress in a manner befitting his true dignity. Flustered by her sudden authority, he insists he can manage his own clothes, but she pulls on her gloves and refuses to let him go. Ignoring his frantic pleas, Rhonda strips away his broad hat, vest, and belt, while teasingly recalling how he used to strip off and run around as a child. He sputters in flustered embarrassment, desperately trying to keep his shirt pulled shut against her teasing. When he desperately tries to pull back and hold his collar together, Rhonda forcefully yanks open his shirt with an unyielding shout, completely shattering his frantic attempts at modesty. The playful atmosphere vanishes in an instant. Covering her mouth in horrified shock, Rhonda stares tearfully at his bare chest, deeply heartbroken by the severe, jagged battle scars carved across his body from 10 long years in exile. Clutching his shirt closed, he softly admits this was why he wanted to dress himself. Tenderly cradling his cheek, Rhonda tearfully asks what became of him during those lost years, but he gently begs her to keep his scars a secret from Tyria. Wiping away her tears, Rhonda yields to his heartfelt plea and promises to guard his secret, swearing that from now on she alone will assist him with his attire. Deeply relieved, he offers her his quiet, sincere thanks for her loyalty. Stepping outside impeccably attired in elegant noble garments, he approaches the waiting carriage. Seeing him looking so remarkably refined, Butler Aldio smiles in relief, confessing he feared the young master would show up dressed like a bandit and startle Lady Tyria. Laughing off his narrow escape, he credits Rhonda for saving him from looking like a bandit, while Aldio admits the headmaid's sharp intuition never fails. As the carriage door opens, he turns to await his wife. Stepping forward in an exquisite dark dress, Tyria shyly asks how she looks for their very first outing together. Flushing red at her radiant appearance, he stammers that she looks lovely, bringing a soft, beaming smile to her face that convinces Rhonda to quietly step aside. Holding hands, they board the carriage to begin their inspection. Arriving at the estate's bustling market, whispers instantly ripple across the crowded street as townsfolk recognize the long-absent young lord. Smiling bashfully alongside Tyria, he offers a humble, warm greeting, relieved to see the village thriving. In the grocery district, Auntie Michelle calls out in delight upon recognizing him. Exclaiming in amazement at how the tiny boy grew into such a fine gentleman, her enthusiastic praise brings a gentle, contented smile to Tyria's face. Passing through the inn district, old acquaintances gather around in surprise to celebrate his return. When they notice his cane and ask about his leg, he casually downplays it as a minor injury, though they playfully insist their future lord needs to remain strong and healthy. A loud, energetic voice cuts through the crowd, calling out to Boss Elric. Turning around, he recognizes his childhood friend Bart, who beams with ecstatic joy at seeing him back home. Locking hands in a firm grip, the two pull each other into a hearty embrace, laughing over how much Elric has grown. Turning respectfully toward Tyria, Bart offers his warm greetings to the lady, who greets him with familiar kindness. Before parting ways, Bart warmly invites Elric to drop by his tavern for a drink during the upcoming festival after-party. As he watches the young lord walk away hand in hand with his wife, Bart smiles fondly to himself, realizing how remarkably well-matched the two truly are. As their carriage rides past golden wheat fields bathed in the evening sun, Elric quietly gazes across at Tyria, who is absorbed in studying a botanical encyclopedia. Flushing with sudden, earnest hesitation, he softly calls out her name to get her attention. Looking up in surprise, Tyria listens closely as Elric confesses how deeply he regrets leaving her to handle the estate's heavy responsibilities all by herself. Earnestly asking her to guide him so he can finally fulfill his duty as lord of the house, he leaves her hiding a flustered blush behind her open book. Deeply touched by how remarkably dependable her husband has become, Tyria gently lowers the book onto her lap and gazes straight into his eyes. Flushing softly, she asks if she may be just as strict with him as his late father was during her own lessons, an offer Elric happily accepts with a warm smile. As their carriage rolls up to the grand estate beneath the glowing twilight sky, Elric playfully inquires about his father's strict tutoring. Tyria proudly smiles back, teasing that she was far too quick a study to ever earn a single scolding. Meanwhile, far away in a bustling tavern near the Chebor border, Evening falls over a room packed with drinking patrons. The noisy chatter suddenly grinds to a halt as a bold traveler steps through the doorway, calling out sharply to demand the room's attention. As the noisy tavern chatter suddenly falls dead silent, the bartender stares in startled confusion at the mysterious visitor. Standing boldly in the doorway, a cloak-clad, red-haired young woman narrows her sharp gaze across the tense room. Sternly declaring she will only ask once, she directly demands to know the current whereabouts of Kasha, the sword demon. As golden dusk fills the study, the young lord watches his wife diligently manage heavy haystacks of estate paperwork. When she gently looks up and asks if he would consider delivering a speech for the harvest festival to mark his return, the unexpected request catches him off guard. The thought of speaking publicly stirs uneasy memories of his past as the mercenary Kasha. On ruthless battlefields, warlords bellowed grand speeches to rally their men, but he had always retreated into the shadows, never imagining himself standing before a crowd. He fought not out of duty but as an outlet for his aimless rage. Charging headlong into slaughter, he cut down anyone before him like a wild beast, leaving only blood in his wake. Standing panting amidst the carnage, he questioned how someone with such a scarred past could ever address innocent villagers. Snapping back to the quiet study, he apologizes to his wife for letting his mind wander. Eager to support her, he proposes standing by her side while she delivers the speech instead. Soft relief washes over her, and she gladly agrees, knowing that having him near is all she truly needs. On the day of the harvest festival, the townspeople assemble in the village square. Standing together at the center of the festival grounds, she addresses the crowd with warmth, her devoted husband keeping his promise beside her. As she wraps up her warm opening speech and cordially invites everyone to enjoy the harvest festival to their heart's content, the townspeople erupt in joyous cheers. Turning toward her husband with a radiant, affectionate smile, she gently takes his hand and asks if they should head out into the village together. Strolling hand in hand through the bustling sunlit market, the lord and lady are instantly recognized by enthusiastic villagers eager to share their food. Generous locals offer hot, savory dishes and foamy mugs of ale, and the couple happily accepts their warm hospitality, thanking the townspeople and wishing everyone a wonderful day. Suddenly, a bright display across the square catches her attention. Gasping in surprise, she affectionately links arms with her husband and eagerly points toward a wooden stage, where a traveling royal jester grandly bows and announces a rare spectacle for the village. The surrounding crowd watches in breathless awe as the performer takes a gleaming steel blade and smoothly slides it down his throat in a dramatic act of sword swallowing. When the trick concludes to loud fanfare, she claps her hands with uninhibited delight. Glancing over, she notices her husband looking entirely unfazed by the dramatic show and hesitant to join the applause. When she gently asks if he found it underwhelming, he rubs his neck with a sheepish smile, explaining that he has seen many sword swallowers before, discreetly hiding the grim battlefields where men met that precise fate at his hands. As they continue strolling down the lively festival strip, they pass a knife-throwing game where the friendly stall-keeper calls out, challenging the lord to hit hanging apple targets for a prize. Surrounding children instantly bounce with excitement, begging to see their lord step up and show off his throwing skills. He chuckles nervously and hesitates, confessing that it has been a long time since he last handled a blade. But as his wife softly takes his arm and coaxingly asks him to join in for the children's sake, a warm blush spreads across his face. Yielding to her sweet request, he steps forward to take up the throwing knife. The stall-keeper warmly encourages him to take it easy and just aim for 2 targets. But the moment the lord releases the knives, they fly with flawless precision, piercing all 3 apples dead center. The astonished vendor gapes in stunned silence as the surrounding children erupt into ecstatic cheers. Catching his wife's wide-eyed, breathless awe, he panics internally, wondering if he should have feigned poor aim. Quickly, rubbing his neck with a nervous laugh, he brushes the feet off as mere luck, hoping his quick cover-up is enough to preserve his modest cover. Beaming with uninhibited delight, she praises him for looking just like a true knight in action. Though he sheepishly downplays her flattering words, he glances at her radiant face with a gentle smile, feeling genuine warmth that the festival atmosphere has made her so happy. The stallkeeper then presents him with the grand prize, a woven bundle of eggs provided by the local merchant guild. Rather than taking the reward for himself, the thoughtful lord generously directs the vendor to hand it over to the delighted children who wildly celebrate their lord's kindness. Watching his generous gesture, she gazes at him with deep affection and compliments his gentle nature. Blushing, he reminisces about receiving similar egg bundles as a boy and finding a lucky golden egg inside. She laughs merrily, recalling how he traded that golden egg for a knight's helmet so large it looked like a giant bucket over his head. Startled by her detailed knowledge, he turns and asks how she could possibly know about such a private childhood memory. Flustered, she hastily claims it was just an old village rumor, discreetly hiding the truth that she had secretly watched him from afar back then, already longing in her heart to become his bride. As the warm glow of dusk settles over the marketplace, he gently interrupts her flustered thoughts and extends an open hand, inviting her to join the plaza after party. Looking into his eyes with tender affection, she softly agrees and places her hand into his as they walk forward together. As dusk turns to night, the plaza fills with townspeople gathered for the ceremonial torch lighting to kick off the after-party. The enthusiastic speaker bows, thanking the lord and lady for gracing them with their presence and teasingly praising her beauty, drawing amused smiles from the couple amidst the crowd. Building up the crowd's excitement to pray for the territory's long-lasting glory and prosperity, the host suddenly grandly announces a special tradition before lighting the fire. To the couple's utter surprise, he loudly calls for a kiss ceremony between Lord Elric and Lady Tyria. Stunned speechless, the pair freeze in place and glance sideways at each other, bright blushes spreading across their faces. Her mind races in flustered disbelief at the thought of sharing such an intimate kiss right here in front of the entire village. As the night festival reaches its peak, the host gathers everyone in the town square to announce the highlight of the evening: a kissing ceremony for Lord Elric and Lady Tyria. Taken completely off guard by the announcement, the two walk forward with flushed faces, stolen glances, and trembling steps. Bart loudly teases Elric from the stage, egging the crowd on until the entire square erupts into a relentless chant for a kiss. Surrounded by cheering onlookers, both Elric and Tyria blush furiously, trapped in a moment of intense shared embarrassment. Asking for her forgiveness in a soft whisper, Elric suddenly sweeps Tyria down into a dramatic dip. He carefully covers her face with his hand to shield her from view, explaining that he is only putting on a believable show so the villagers will finally let them be. Tyria gazes up at him with a gentle smile, whispering that she understands his intention. But refusing to merely pretend, she pulls Elric close and pulls him into a true, breathtaking kiss, igniting an explosive roar of celebration from the delighted crowd as the bonfire flares into the night sky. Later inside her quiet bedchamber, Tyria buries her face into a pillow, screaming in complete emotional overload. Coming up for air with her face still burning red, the vivid memory of taking the initiative sends her into a frantic panic over what she just did. Outside her bedroom door, Tyria lies awake worrying if Elric will now view her as a strange woman. Across the residence, Elric is just as restless, staring up at the canopy with his heart pounding frantically while his fingers trace his lips in stunned disbelief. Meanwhile, at the Grand EW residence in Whitewick, Chairman Edward White calmly sips his tea. His secretary reports that the Imperial Army has breached the border defense lines of Falbon and Chevor, which have begun collapsing helplessly ever since Commander Kasha stepped down. Calling the scheme targeting Kasha a stroke of brilliance, Edward listens as his secretary, Agnes Blackmire, warns him that Falbon and Chevor hold major financial stakes in the EW group, questioning if they can really afford to let them fall. Unconcerned, Edward points out that the 7-year war has completely drained those regions, leaving them unable to repay their massive debts to Armin. Rather than saving them, he plans to extract key personnel and recover their shares right before the final collapse. As Agnes pours more tea and bluntly calls his actions ruthless, Edward bursts into a sweat, defensively arguing that he is merely doing his duty as a noble of Armin rather than acting out of cold cruelty. Agnes then shifts to Kasha, now living under the name Elric Portman, asking if it is wise to leave him alive or if they should have blown his head off. Edward recoils in fear, knowing a failed attempt would bring Elric straight for his neck. He vividly recalls Elric on the battlefield, deflecting a supersonic bullet with a split-second mana shield, even after having his leg severely wounded, proving that targeting such a monster would have meant certain death. Edward explains to Agnes that keeping Elric alive is actually far more advantageous than killing him. Recognizing that Elric is a rare mercenary who acts out of conviction rather than personal gain, Edward intends to exploit those honorable traits to keep the legendary warrior completely under his thumb. With Elric removed from the battlefield, the long war will soon grind into a stagnant stalemate. Agnes instantly sees through Edward's grand scheme. Desperate kingdoms will come knocking on the EW Group's door for war loans, allowing Edward to dictate the outcome of the war while accumulating immense wealth. Thrilled that she understood his strategy so perfectly, Edward excitedly jumps up and lunges forward to give Agnes a celebratory hug. But his secretary immediately shuts him down with a brutal blow, leaving the young chairman groaning on the carpet while she sternly warns him never to try any funny business. The following morning, bright sunlight bathes the grand estate as maid Runda assists Elric in his quarters. She carefully adjusts his new brown coat in front of the vanity mirror, asking if the tailor's fit feels comfortable. Just as Elric tries to speak with Runda, Tyria enters the bedchamber and instantly freezes in her tracks. Seeing Elric looking remarkably handsome in his new formal clothes, with Runda leaning close against his shoulder, Tyria's face ignites in a deep crimson blush, while Elric turns toward her with a wildly racing heart. Before either of them can speak, Runda cheerfully steps between them to ask Tyria what she needs. Overcome by intense self-consciousness and the electrifying memory of their kiss from the night before, Tyria turns around and sprints down the corridor, leaving Elric rubbing his neck in total flustered dismay. Noticing the awkward tension, Runda gently inquires if Elric and Tyria had a quarrel, mentioning rumors of their intense embrace at the night festival. A flustered Elric frantically insists that Bart instigated the crowd, his face burning deep crimson as he hastily changes the subject. Runda explains that a trade delegation from the Western Kingdoms is arriving today to purchase Wibbin's valuable wheat, adding that even Armen Kingdom has joined the intense bidding war. Hearing this unexpected news, Elric freezes in sudden alarm, plagued by fear that someone from the bloody warfront might recognize him and drag chaos to the peaceful territory. Elric broods over his past. Still, accepting his duty, he agrees to step forward as the master of the house to welcome the envoys. Down at the Grand Wibbin train station, Elric waits nervously beside butler Aldio. Seeing his master's visible anxiety, Aldio offers reassuring words, encouraging him to simply deliver the polite greetings they practice together. Resting his hand over the dagger concealed beneath his tailored coat, Elric takes a deep breath to calm his mind. He reassures himself that no veteran who knew his fierce reputation on the battlefield would ever travel to a quiet rural province just to trade grain. The steam locomotive pulls into the station with a loud hiss, and the Western delegates step onto the platform. Stepping forward with a polite bow, Elric formally greets the distinguished visitors on behalf of the Portman estate. But as Elric offers carriages to take them to the estate, he locks eyes with an older delegate. Shocked recognition strikes the man instantly. Trembling in sheer horror, the envoy recoils in terror, gasping out Commander Kasha's feared name. High above the Armen Kingdom in White Wick, anxious whispers echo outside the grand estate as word of an unexpected guest breaks the silence. Spurred by sudden panic, the flustered young nobleman scrambles urgently down the ornate hallway, desperate to see who has arrived when his sister had not uttered a single word about it. Bursting open the doors with wide, joyful arms, he calls out eagerly to Sister Egret in celebration. Yet her sharp amber eyes remain entirely unamused by his arrival. Sitting composed with her arms crossed, Egret Valentina, the formidable majority shareholder of EW known as the Blazing Flower, fixes him with a harsh, unyielding stare. Swept up in his excitement, he scoops her straight off her feet, playfully exclaiming how much taller she has grown since they last met. But her gaze ignites with fierce irritation. She sternly threatens to incinerate him on the spot if he does not put her down, instantly turning his playful mood into dizzy terror. Brushing the foolishness aside, Egret cuts straight to business, crossly demanding to know if he has finally located Kasha after days of waiting. He rubs his neck sheepishly under her glare, nervously admitting that the elusive sword demon vanishes like a ghost, making him extraordinarily difficult for anyone to track down. Outraged that he talks so big yet fails to find a single man, Egret threatens to pull all her shares from EW. The terrifying prospect sends him into a panic as he desperately clings to her, begging for mercy while she squishes his cheek forcefully, ordering him to find that bastard Kasha without further delay. Spinning around with a dramatic swirl of her dark cape, Egret prepares to leave, casting one last stern look back over her shoulder. She makes it crystal clear that she will not give him much time, commanding him to uncover Kasha's whereabouts at the very least, leaving him with no choice but to meekly submit. Once Egret departs, the flustered nobleman admits to his subordinate that he would never actually reveal Kasha's whereabouts to her, terrified of the catastrophic conflict that would erupt if those two formidable fighters ever cross paths. Shifting his attention, he inquires whether the trade delegation has been successfully dispatched to Wibin. Though his aide doubts the elusive sword demon will bite such obvious bait, the nobleman smirks with supreme confidence, convinced that Lord Elric Portman cannot afford to refuse the extraordinarily lucrative proposal he has crafted. Meanwhile, a grand steam train thunders through vast golden wheat fields on its way to Wibin. Inside the quiet compartment, high-ranking delegates sit rigid in uncomfortable silence under the sharp, unyielding gaze of their senior representative, carefully preparing themselves for the crucial political negotiations that lie ahead at the estate. The locomotive grinds to a halt at Wibin Station, where Elric Portman and his faithful butler stand waiting on the sunny platform. Bowing with refined grace, Elric warmly greets the incoming trade delegates and offers private carriages to escort them straight to the Portman estate. But as he speaks, his gaze lands directly on one of the visiting nobles, instantly shattering his calm composure into utter disbelief. Recognizing Elric on the spot, Lord Polo pales in overwhelming terror and clutches his throat in sudden shock. Elric races in wild panic as he realizes the catastrophic danger unfolding before him. If his secret identity as the feared sword demon Kasha is exposed right here, his quiet life and the safety of Wibin will be completely ruined. While Lord Polo hysterically demands to turn the train around in panic, Elric acts quickly to protect his hidden identity. Suppressing his formidable presence, he puts on an absurdly foolish, drooling smile and acts completely brainless, introducing himself as simple Lord Elric Portman to trick the frightened noble into believing he had simply mistaken his identity. Staring directly at Elric's absurdly foolish grin, Lord Polo stammers in total bewilderment, desperately attempting to reconcile this bumbling nobleman with the ruthless sword demon of legend. He eagerly reassures his racing heart that such an oblivious, cheerful lord could never possibly be the terrifying killer he witnessed 5 years ago. His mind rewinds to a grand ballroom years past, where an arrogant noble hurled bitter insults at young Kasha's unknown lineage. The sudden, violent confrontation sent shockwaves through the gathered court aristocrats, who watched in horror as the humiliated lord sprawled across the ornate floor, screaming in absolute rage. Completely unbothered by the noble's arrogant taunts, young Kasha calmly unbuttoned his white glove. With cold, dangerous precision, he threw it straight into the man's face, formally demanding a duel of honor to settle the slight and forcing the furious aristocrat to command his guards to fetch 2 swords. Before blades could be drawn, a frantic nobleman in a wheelchair surged into the hall to halt the guard's hands. Desperately pleading with the offended lord for magnanimity, he turned around and sternly commanded Kasha to lower his head and offer an immediate apology to prevent complete financial and social disaster. That terrifying memory of Kasha's cold, unyielding red eyes had haunted Lord Polo for 5 long years. To him, the legendary sword demon was a cursed creature whose name was never to be spoken, a force of sheer destruction that no sane man would ever dare oppose on the battlefield. Shaking off his lingering panic, Lord Polo lets out a long sigh of relief, convincing himself that he simply overreacted to a striking resemblance. As Elric warmly invites the trade delegation to move forward, Polo follows along, entirely unaware that the terrifying ghost of his nightmares is walking right in front of him. As the luxury carriage thunders toward the Portman estate beneath a brilliant golden sunset, Elric steals a sharp, watchful glance at Lord Polo. Though he successfully played the fool to diffuse immediate danger, he remains on high alert while the driver announces their imminent arrival at the mansion. Stepping out into the courtyard, Lady Tyria Portman greets the arriving delegates with an elegant, welcoming smile. Presenting herself as the lady of the house, she graciously acknowledges their long journey and immediately commands her headmaid, Rhonda, to escort the tired guests to their luxurious quarters for well-deserved rest. As night falls over the quiet estate, a firm knock reverberates down the corridor outside Lord Polo's room. Unwinding inside his suite, the exhausted noble grumbles with irritation, assuming it is merely unwanted room service as he reluctantly gets up and trudges toward the door to send the servant away. Swinging the door wide open to complain, Lord Polo's words immediately catch in his throat. Standing silently in the dimly lit hallway is Elric, but his cheerful, foolish demeanor has completely vanished, replaced by an icy, piercing gaze that commands absolute authority as he coldly addresses his terrified guest. Overcome by raw, paralyzing terror, Lord Polo collapses backward onto the hard floor, his heart racing in panic. Pointing a trembling finger at the imposing figure before him, he stammers frantically, realizing beyond any doubt that those terrifying red eyes belong to none other than the feared sword demon Kasha. Outside the grand mansion, sharp cries cut through the night as the terrified man cowers on the floor, recognizing the lethal sword demon standing before him. Trembling under that intense glare, he frantically stammers out excuses, pleading about an apology he claimed to have offered back then. Unmoved by the panicked pleas, he calmly settles into an armchair and grips his cane with steady hands. He coolly reminds the kneeling lord of the day his family was insulted, making it clear that such an offense was never forgiven nor forgotten. Telling the trembling man to get off the floor and sit down, he shifts the conversation directly to business. With cold, unwavering red eyes, he confronts Lord Polo D. Nodum about his true purpose for arriving, to secure the trade for Wibbon's wheat. As the two men sit across from each other at the table, a heavy silence fills the room while Lord Polo nervously listens. He then reveals that prior to this encounter he had already met with Lord Yugal, who came forward with a major business offer. Recalling that meeting, Lord Yugal had proposed purchasing the entire supply of Wibbon's wheat to distribute across the western region under the Armen Kingdom. Holding up a shiny gold coin, Yugal slid it forward, promising that a sizable portion of the distribution commissions would be paid directly to the Portman family. Yet that offer carried one absolute condition. Every last bundle of wheat had to be sold exclusively to the Armen Kingdom. Yugal urged him to make a wise judgment as the head of the house, a sly smile lingering on his face as he left the proposal open. Slamming his heavy hands onto the table in a fit of rage, Lord Polo curses Yugal for secretly plotting behind his back to steal the trade. Taking complete advantage of the Lord's sudden fury, Elric sits back calmly and proposes that Polo cut Yugal out entirely to do business directly with him instead. Elric sets a firm condition, demanding to sell the full stock at a price matching Armen's generous offer. Although Polo nervously insists he cannot decide on such a price alone, Elric suggests that accepting the trade will officially wipe away the lingering bad blood from their past insult. Anxious under the pressure, Polo clasps his hands and desperately tries bargaining at 60%. When Elric remains completely impassive, the terrified lord hastily raises his offer to 70%, promising that the Empire will absorb all transportation costs and customs duties. Elric coolly counters at 75%, holding his ground until Polo eagerly grasps his hand to seal the agreement. Standing together, Polo marvels out loud, admitting that Elric must be the very first person to pull off such aggressive negotiation against the Empire. Curious about the sudden opportunity, Polo asks why Elric chose to work with him of all people. Though Elric secretly considers him the easiest target, he keeps that harsh truth hidden, smoothly offering a warm smile and calling it a simple chance to make amends. Just as the deal concludes, Elric leans in to make one final terrifying request. With his red eyes narrowing, he coldly warns Polo that if a single rumor leaks claiming Kasha was spotted in Wibbon, their contract will be rewritten in blood. Sweating nervously under the high stakes of the meeting, Lord Polo listens as the grand assembly gathers around the table. With a bright and confident smile, Tyria steps forward to announce that the Portman family will officially enter an exclusive trade agreement with the Imperial Army, prompting Elric to clap along with quiet pride. While the surrounding nobles offer their congratulations, a furious Lord Edmund Ugal slams his hand onto the table in complete disbelief. He angrily demands to know if Tyria acted without her husband's knowledge. But Tyria remains unbothered, calmly explaining that everything aligns with her lord's wishes before cutting him off to correct his disrespect. Leaving Ugal stunned, Tyria stands tall beside Elric and proudly asserts her identity as Tyria Portman, the wife of the lord, standing right next to her. Narrowing her eyes with calm authority, she chides him for repeatedly using the wrong title, leaving the thoroughly embarrassed noble stammering out a formal apology. Watching the arrogant diplomat get put in his place, Lord Polo hides, a satisfied chuckle behind his hand. As the dangerous tension in the room officially breaks, Elric quietly exhales, his fingers finally relaxing their tight grip over the handle of his cane. Outside the grand estate, Elric instructs the coachman to safely escort the visiting delegation back to the station. Lord Polo nods back through the carriage window with his scroll in hand, leaving Elric and Tyria standing together as the carriage rides away into the vast golden wheat fields. Turning toward her with a warm smile, Elric admits he sees her in a completely new light, deeply impressed by her resolute composure. Closing her eyes with a gentle smile, Tyria warmly replies that she was simply speaking the undeniable truth. Tyria gently teases Elric with a fond smile, revealing she had already inspected the official contract documents Lord Polo delivered. Realizing the terms were secretly highly profitable for their estate, she praises his clever maneuver in publicly humbling the arrogant Armin envoy. Scratching the back of his head with a bashful grin, Elric admits he simply wanted to dent the envoy's pride, and the two walk back inside hand in hand. Meanwhile, inside the Grand EW private residence, Chairman White bursts into a frantic meltdown. Grabbing his head in sheer disbelief, he screams out in frustration, unable to comprehend why Elric rejected his lucrative wheat deal. He rants about splitting distribution margins and offering high prices, utterly baffled as to why Elric refused to follow his carefully laid plans, while his silver-haired aide helplessly urges him to calm down. In the middle of his chaotic tirade, Chairman White loses his footing and slips violently backward. But before he can crash onto the hard floor, his sharp-eyed assistant moves with lightning speed, catching him mid-fall and sliding across the hall to hold him safely against her chest. Holding him close, she sternly reprimands him for losing control, prompting the flustered chairman to meekly apologize to his beloved aide. Once she lovingly pours him a cup of soothing warm tea to steady his nerves, he gazes up at her with soft gratitude, finally relaxing under her attentive care. Reflecting quietly over his teacup, Chairman White turns his thoughts to Elric's past as the legendary sword demon Kasha. Knowing how fiercely Elric once opposed the Empire, he admits that partnering with Lord Polo completely defied his expectations, leaving him deeply unsettled over what the former mercenary truly intends to gain. Stepping forward with steady composure, his silver-haired assistant coolly advises that when someone's true motives remain hidden, the best option is to confront them face-to-face and ask directly. Considering her words, Chairman White slowly nods in agreement before reaching down to slide open his desk drawer. Revealing an ornate golden revolver resting on red velvet, he murmurs that he will need a proper means of persuasion when they finally meet. At the grand mansion of House Elvers Graham, Sir Polo arrives from Wyvern to deliver an unexpected document. Handing over the unsealed scroll, Polo explains that it comes directly from Sir Elric Portman. Sir Graham inspects the parchment with quiet curiosity, wondering what business Elric could possibly have with him. As he unrolls the letter and reads the words written within, Lord Graham chokes in shock before bursting into ringing laughter. The unexpected realization that Elric is actually Kasha completely catches him off guard, turning his quiet study into a sudden burst of merriment. Still chuckling, Graham comments on how utterly bewildered Sir Polo must have been to cross paths with Kasha in Wyvern. Polo admits he nearly fainted from the shock, but Graham warmly thanks him for delivering the news before bidding the traveler a safe journey home. Holding the letter tightly, Lord Graham gazes off thoughtfully, reflecting on Kasha's mysterious vanishings and her sudden arrival in Wibben. Meanwhile, across the realm, frigid winter winds begin to sweep across snow-dusted, barren fields. Through a quiet winter forest, a sudden rifle shot breaks the silence. A young trainee hunter named Derek cheers with his companions as their shot strikes true, bringing down a massive deer that promises to secure their standing as official hunters. While his companions celebrate and prepare to transport the heavy carcass back to camp, Derek suddenly freezes in place, his face turning pale with tension. As his friend asks what is wrong, Derek presses a single gloved finger to his lips, signaling urgent quiet. Grasping his weapon with trembling intent, Derek sharply orders his companions to step away from the fallen deer at once. Surprised by his sudden fear, the others look on in total confusion, oblivious to the hidden danger lurking in the woods. Derek desperately tries to warn his companions about an unnatural chill hanging in the snowy forest, convinced a dangerous magical beast is lurking nearby. Though his companion scoffs and dismisses his fear as mere winter cold, Derek frantically cocks his rifle, shouting at them to move out of the way before the hidden threat strikes. A wave of biting frost creeps across the ground as a massive wolf, with glowing eyes, looms terrifyingly over the helpless hunters. Baring its sharp teeth, the monstrous predator corners the trainees in the snow, instantly turning their celebration into frozen terror. Back inside the safety of the estate, Lady Tyria listens with gentle sympathy as the shaken young men confess to fleeing the forest in complete panic. Reassuring them that she will personally handle the matter with the Lord, Tyria warmly orders her maid Rhonda to serve the traumatized hunters hot tea and a nourishing meal. Seeking answers, the loyal butler pulls a heavy monster encyclopedia from the library archives to carefully cross-reference the hunters' panicked testimonies. As Tyria looks on attentively, he examines the ancient illustrations and gravely confirms that the creature stalking their lands is a formidable blade wolf. Tyria gasps in disbelief, remembering that these magical beasts vanished long ago after their formidable alpha was slain. That original leader was the very monster that nearly took the Lord's life, leaving a severe, jagged scar across his neck during a horrific battle that still haunts the estate. Refusing to stand by while the people of the fief face such deadly peril, Tyria sets her face with fierce, unyielding resolve. She passionately orders the immediate organization of a subjugation squad, instructing her butler to assemble the realm's most elite hunters and specifically calling upon Aldio to join the hunt. Determined to shield her husband from harm, Lady Tyria quietly instructs the butler to keep their plan a secret from the Lord. Though caught off guard by her sudden request, the loyal butler respectfully promises to honor her wishes without question. At the grand estate entrance, Lord Graham bids Lady Tyria a warm farewell before stepping inside his carriage and setting off on his journey, completely unaware of the monstrous predator haunting their snow-covered lands. When the butler cautions that the Lord might feel hurt by the secrecy, Tyria explains that his stubborn nature would force him to fight despite his leg injury. Her thoughts drift back to their youth, vividly recalling the horrifying moment when young Elric recklessly threw himself in front of the beast to save her. Vowing never to let him face such terrifying peril again, Tyria meets with the squad of elite hunters assembled by the butler, resolved to eradicate the monster threat before her husband returns home from his trip. When the startled butler realizes she plans to accompany the subjugation squad into the snowy forest, Tyria firmly declares that standing beside her people is her solemn duty as a noble. Reluctantly yielding to her resolve, the butler gravely insists that she must withdraw immediately should the beast appear. Meanwhile, in the snow-dusted shopping district of Wibben, Lord Graham visits a doctor's clinic for a physical checkup. The physician notes with satisfaction that his leg injury is almost entirely healed, though he strongly recommends keeping the walking cane nearby for a little longer. As the doctor inquires whether the jagged scar across his neck still causes any lingering pain or after-effects, Lord Graham smiles warmly, giving full credit for his survival to the legendary doctor who treated his severe wounds all those years ago. As the doctor finishes the physical checkup, he reflects on the past, recalling how desperately Elric's father, Lord Hoven, begged him to save his young son's life after the horrific Blade Wolf attack. The sudden revelation leaves Elric completely stunned, struggling to reconcile his memory of a distant father, with a man who turned pale with terror for his child. Stepping out of the clinic into the snow-covered streets of Wibben, Elric halts in surprise when a familiar voice calls out his true name. Turning around, he instantly recognizes his childhood friend Luton, who steps forward with a warm smile to greet his former captain after their long years apart. Overjoyed by the unexpected encounter, Elric laughs heartily and pulls his old friend into a tight embrace. As Luton proudly shows off the fine sword bestowed upon him by the royal court, Elric warmly suggests heading to a local tavern where he can buy drinks and hear all about what happened during his long exile. Their cheerful reunion is abruptly cut short when a breathless messenger comes running frantically down the snowy street, shouting Luton's title. Ruining Luton's peaceful day off, the panicked soldier holds out a scroll, gasping that an urgent request for rescue has just arrived directly from the Portman estate. Stunned by the sudden announcement, Elric and Luton press the messenger for answers, demanding to know what could have happened. Elric's blood runs cold and his eyes widen in horror as the messenger reveals that Lady Tyria has been ambushed by a terrifying magical beast out in the wilderness. High in the snowy mountains, a terrifying pack of demonic wolves ambushes the traveling party. Musket fire echoes across the icy landscape as the guards fight desperately to hold off the vicious beasts, buying precious time for Lady Tyria and her maid to flee towards safety. Spotting a secluded cabin nestled in the snow, Marie urges Tyria to take refuge inside. As the two hurry through the cabin doors, the guards ignite glowing mana stones, bravely risking their own lives to lure the ferocious predators away from the hideout. With the monsters lured into the blizzard, Tyria and Marie huddle tightly beneath a thin blanket, trembling from the biting cold. Tyria remorsefully apologizes for dragging her loyal maid into such danger. But Marie insists she came willingly and promises that help is already on the way. Despite her fear, Tyria smiles softly through the cold, quietly relieved that her husband was kept unaware of the journey. She would rather endure this harrowing ordeal alone than risk putting Elric in harm's way again, bringing tears to Marie's eyes. Meanwhile, Elric gallops frantically through the freezing storm on horseback. His heart aches with confusion and self-doubt as he wonders why Tyria chose to face such peril alone, fearing she finds him completely untrustworthy. His spiral of worry is suddenly broken when his companion shouts his name. As they push onward through the blinding blizzard, Lytton urges Elric to remain calm, promising to save Lady Tyria regardless of the danger. Elric offers a quiet, breathless word of thanks, though his heart remains heavy with worry for the woman he loves. A vivid memory resurfaces of their youth, when a terrified Lytton ran to fetch help, leaving a young Elric alone to confront a terrifying demon beast with only a wooden sword. That lingering regret transformed into a solemn oath, hardening Lytton's resolve to never let his captain fight alone again. Emerging from the snow-covered trees, a frantic guard shouts to draw their attention. Elric dismounts instantly, gripping the man by the shoulders to ask if Tyria is safe. Learning that she is sheltered inside a nearby cabin brings immediate relief, but the guard warns that his comrades are surrounded by deadly blade wolves. Without hesitation, Elric offers to charge into the forest to rescue the trapped guards, but Lytton places a firm hand on his shoulder and stops him. Insisting that Elric must hurry directly to his wife, Lytton takes charge of the rescue effort, declaring proudly that he is no longer the cowardly squire of his past. Looking at his trusted friend, Elric smiles softly, proudly acknowledging that Lytton has grown into a true, full-fledged knight. Reassured, Elric watches as Lytton orders the guard to lead the way, and the two rush off into the freezing blizzard to save the isolated soldiers. With the rescue left in capable hands, Elric turns his focus entirely back toward Tyria. Battling the biting wind and pressing through knee-deep snowdrifts, he advances on foot toward the cabin, driven by a single desperate hope to reach his wife before any further harm can befall her. Fighting his way through the blinding snowstorm, Elric finally catches sight of the isolated cabin nestled among the trees. Without a single moment of hesitation, he bursts through the heavy wooden door and desperately calls out Tyria's name, his voice echoing across the dark room with overwhelming relief. Huddled beneath a thin blanket on the bed, Tyria and Marie look up in utter shock to see Elric standing inside the doorway. Before Tyria can even finish asking why he came, Elric strides briskly across the wooden floorboards and pulls her directly into a tight, desperate embrace. Flustered by his sudden embrace, Tyria breathlessly asks why he ventured so far out into the freezing blizzard. But Elric only grips her shoulder tighter, his eyes filled with emotion as he demands to know why she would undertake such a dangerous journey without ever speaking to him first. Looking up at him with guilt-filled eyes, Tyria confesses that she hid her plans simply because she could not bear to place him in harm's way. Her words cut deep into Elric's heart, leaving him to look down at her with vulnerable sadness, as he softly asks if she really trusts him so little. Tyria stammers to reassure him, but Elric gently pulls her close and cradles her head against his chest. Overwhelmed with relief to find her unharmed, he earnestly begs her to promise that she will never throw herself into danger alone again, and Tyria softly promises against his shoulder. Watching the quiet reconciliation from beneath her blanket, Marie beams with pure warmth and affection. But the peaceful atmosphere is suddenly interrupted as heavy footsteps begin to thud against the cabin entrance, causing both Elric and Tyria to look up toward the doorway in surprise. Marie leaps up to joyfully announce that the brave hunters have successfully returned from the freezing forest. Seeing the snow-covered guards standing at the door, Elric warmly commends their quick work, while Tyria sits by his side with a gentle, serene smile, relieved that the crisis has passed. Looking around the dark cabin, Elric suddenly pauses as a troubling realization strikes him, anxiously demanding to know Lytton's whereabouts. The guards lower their heads before revealing that Sir Lytton commanded them to retreat, staying behind to face the pack of demonic beasts entirely alone. A wave of frustration and worry washes over Elric as he grits his teeth, exasperated by his friend's foolish bravery. Refusing to abandon his loyal companion in the blizzard, Elric immediately takes charge and sternly orders the guards to escort Lady Tyria and Marie safely down the mountain while he charges back out for Lytton. But just as he turns to leave, a soft, desperate tug on his sleeve makes him halt in surprise and look back over his shoulder. Clinging tightly to his dark jacket with tears trembling in her eyes, Tyria tearfully confesses how terrified she is of him getting hurt out in the freezing storm. Blush spreading softly across her flushed cheeks, she looks up at him with vulnerable honesty and begs, "Can you promise me that you will return safely?" Fearing deeply for his safety, she grips his sleeve with trembling hands and tearful eyes, pleading for a promise that he will return home unharmed. He tenderly holds her hands in his own, gently asking for her trust as he promises to bring Luton back and return safely. As her fingers slowly slip away from his sleeve, tears stream down her face as she sternly warns him that she will never forgive him if he breaks his word. With the serene smile and a quiet nod, he promises to keep her warning in mind. Far away in the snowy wilderness, a lone knight named Luton battles fiercely against ferocious magic beasts. He swings his blade with precision, slicing an attacking monster in two. Despite his exhaustion and bloodied armor, he stands his ground as an entire pack of glowing-eyed wolves closes in around him. Covered in blood and gasping for air, Luton laughs bitterly at the overwhelming horde of magic beasts surrounding him. With his vision fading from severe blood loss, he falls to his knees in the snow, unable to lift his sword any longer, and defiantly taunts the pack to make their move. Growling viciously with razor-sharp fangs, a massive magic wolf lunges through the snowstorm to deliver the fatal strike. As the beast opens its formidable jaws right before his face, Luton closes his eyes in quiet resignation, powerless to defend himself against the impending blow. Just as the massive beast opens its jaws for a fatal strike, a sharp gunshot echoes through the blizzard, felling the creature instantly. Dazed and heavily wounded, Luton turns in utter shock to see his own captain, standing calmly amidst the swirling snow with a smoking rifle in hand. Remarking lightly that long-range firearms are not really his style, the Lord immediately reassures his exhausted knight that Tyria remains completely safe. As Luton struggles to understand why his master came to his rescue, the captain gazes down and quietly asks to borrow his sword. Surrounded by the hungry pack, Luton willingly surrenders his weapon, declaring he would give his very life for his captain. Still, he cautions that a heavy battle sword is entirely different from a wooden practice blade and might be too unwieldy for someone unaccustomed to real combat. To Luton's absolute bewilderment, the Lord effortlessly twirls the heavy steel blade with breathtaking precision and fluid ease. Turning toward the growling magic beasts, he offers to personally show his knight what skills he acquired during his 10 long years living away in exile. Channeling a brilliant aura of blue mana into the edge of the blade, he deliberately provokes the creature pack. Sensitive to the sudden surge of raw energy, the furious blade wolves unleash terrifying roars and lunge forward through the snowstorm in a relentless wave. Meeting the charging horde head-on, the Lord moves with blinding speed and lethal artistry, cleaving through the magic beasts in a flurry of lightning-fast strikes. Luton watches in stunned disbelief as his captain effortlessly dismantles the entire ravenous pack in seconds. Staring in sheer awe at the violent battle, Luton recalls the helpless boy he once trained, coming to terms with the astonishing reality that the master standing before him is no longer that inexperienced youth from 10 long years ago. Channeling a torrent of blue mana into lethal strikes, the Lord sweeps through the surrounding horde with blinding speed. He unleashes a tremendous surge of energy, effortlessly annihilating the remaining magic beasts in one decisive wave. Luton stares in flabbergasted disbelief as quiet returns to the snowy woods. Standing calmly among the slaughtered pack, the Lord turns back with a light smirk, asking if his display of strength finally satisfied his knight's lingering curiosity. Collapsing onto the frozen ground in exhaustion, Luton shakes his head, admitting that far from understanding, he feels even more bewildered by the incredible power his captain kept hidden for so long. After bringing his wounded knight safely to a nearby shelter, the Lord offers his sincere gratitude for Luton's bravery. Yet the bandaged knight firmly insists he did nothing, crediting the rescue entirely to his captain. When the Lord gently asks for another favor, Luton smiles with unwavering loyalty. Having owed his life to his master twice over, the knight declares that the captain never needs to ask politely, but simply command him. To Luton's complete astonishment, the Lord requests that his knight take full credit for slaying the magic wolf pack, preferring to keep his own abilities concealed. Though hesitant to claim unearned glory, Luton listens as his master calmly explains that he has crucial reasons for remaining in the shadows. Before a gathered crowd of townspeople in Wibbon, Luton is publicly presented as the valiant hero who single-handedly wiped out the pack of ferocious magic beasts. Though surrounded by loud cheers, the heavily bandaged knight hesitates and stammers, feeling thoroughly conflicted about taking unearned glory. Catching his master's gaze in the crowd as the Lord places a finger over his lip slip, Luton grasps the silent order to guard the truth. Suppressing his hesitation, he humbly accepts the elder's praise for the peace of the realm, allowing the leader to rally the joyful crowd. With his true abilities remaining a secret from the world, the young lord smiles softly to himself and turns from the celebrating town, ready to return home. Across the snowy countryside, the lady waits patiently outside the grand mansion beside her attentive servants. Relief washes over her as the horse-drawn carriage pulls into the courtyard, and her lord steps down into the snow to greet her. Greeting him with a gentle smile, she admits her growing worry over his late arrival. Rubbing his neck with a bashful blush, he apologizes for keeping her waiting, explaining that expressing his gratitude to Luton kept him longer than expected. Noticing he is walking steadily without his cane, she asks after his leg with tender concern. He light-heartedly taps his leg to prove he has fully recovered, then gazes softly into her eyes, leaving her pleasantly flustered. With genuine concern in his eyes, he earnestly asks her never to place herself in danger alone again. Blushing with a tender smile, Tyria promises to keep his warning close to her heart, before he warmly suggests they step inside to escape the biting cold. Escorting her into the grand mansion, he politely holds open the entrance door, insisting that his lady enter first. Watching their sweet interaction from the courtyard, the delighted maids whisper and giggle, teasingly remarking that spring, if not summer, has finally arrived between their lord and lady. Just as Tyria begins to express her gratitude inside the warm hallway, a sudden spell of dizziness overwhelms her. Flushed with a heavy fever, she collapses onto the floor, leaving her panicked master to catch her in his arms, and desperately scream for Lady Tyria to pull through. As the medical carriage waits in the cold, the physician delivers a deeply troubling update regarding his wife. Dr. Hoban informs Elric with a heavy heart that her ladyship's physical condition is far worse than they had initially anticipated. He warns that she may soon reach a critical, life-threatening turning point. Looking closely at the doctor's somber face, Elric's heart sinks in terror as he recognizes that same grim expression from a painful memory in his past. Driven by sudden desperation, Elric tightly grabs the physician by the arm and pleads with him to do his absolute best. He begs him to save her, declaring that she is deeply precious to him. Overwhelmed by his emotion, the doctor bows deeply and vows to do everything in his power. The carriage gallops away into the distance, speeding across the barren, snow-covered landscape. Left standing outside the grand manor in the biting winter cold, Elric stares into the snowy expanse and exhales a faint, trembling whisper for his beloved lady. Buckling under the unbearable weight of shock and fear, Elric collapses onto his knees in the freezing snow outside. The worried maidservants hurry over to assist him, anxiously imploring their master to pull himself together and stay calm during this critical hour. Retreating inside the silent manor, Elric sits alone at the dining table, staring blankly at the freshly cooked breakfast. He vividly recalls how Tyria used to sit right across from him, gently asking if the food suited his taste while offering a beautiful, reassuring smile. Bitter self-reproach weighs heavily upon his mind as he gazes down in silence. Elric reflects on how little they actually communicated throughout their days together, agonizingly questioning why he had never reached out or tried to talk to her more when he had the chance. The carefully prepared plate of eggs, toast, and fresh salad remains completely untouched before him. Watching their lord from across the quiet room with deeply anxious eyes, the housemaids whisper among themselves in dread, frightened because their master cannot bring himself to take a single bite. Watching their master sit motionless before his breakfast, the anxious maidservants quietly prepare to clear away the completely untouched plate. When Rhonda steps forward to express her deep concern over his sudden refusal to eat, Elric gazes down with a heavy heart, softly apologizing to her and explaining that the agonizing worry for his wife has left him entirely without an appetite. Hoping to offer him a brief respite from his agonizing thoughts, Rhonda gently suggests taking a quiet walk through a secluded garden that Tyria cherished above all else. Stepping out into the courtyard, Elric is thoroughly mesmerized to see a sea of vibrant blue roses blooming brilliantly amidst the freezing winter snow, sustained entirely by her boundless devotion and magical care. Looking down at the breathtaking floral expanse, Elric thoughtfully recalls his own forgotten fondness for plants during his younger years, though the memory feels agonizingly distant now. Where delicate blossoms once occupied his thoughts, his mind has long since been haunted by the grim horrors of war, filled with burning flames, blood, and the gruesome sight of fallen comrades on the battlefield. Rhonda warmly continues their conversation, sharing that Tyria often spoke fondly of her childhood connection to nature, and how she had once dreamed of becoming a skilled medic. The unexpected revelation leaves Elric thoroughly stunned, struggling to comprehend why a high-born lady raised in noble luxury would ever yearn for such a humble and demanding path. At those very words, a sudden shockwave of clarity tears through Elric's mind, instantly awakening a long-buried memory of a young girl's small hands tenderly offering him a wrapped medicine pouch. Overwhelmed by the profound realization, he bows his head in shock, quietly assuring the worried maid that a crucial piece of his forgotten past has finally returned to him. Driven back by the biting winter air and a growing need for clarity, Elric agrees to retreat inside the grand manor and heads straight toward Tyria's private office. Upon stepping through the doorway, however, he halts in his tracks, deeply surprised to find her elderly retainer, Aldio, quietly seated at her desk, surrounded by towering stacks of official paperwork. Surprised to find Aldio surrounded by towering stacks of estate paperwork, Elric questions his background before angrily lashing out at the elderly retainer. He blames the heavy administrative workload for breaking Tyria's health, scolding him for not stepping in sooner. However, Aldio calmly maintains his composure, explaining that he was merely following Lady Tyria's explicit command to let her handle everything. Eager to lighten the estate's burden and ease his own mounting guilt, Elric desperately asks if there is any task he can assist with. But Aldio politely yet firmly turns him down, insisting on concentrating on his duties alone without interruption. Feeling thoroughly rejected and helpless, Elric quietly withdraws, offering to have Rhonda prepare some warm tea for the retainer. A short while later, Rhonda nervously wheels a golden tea cart through the mansion hallway, knocking softly before entering the sitting room. She finds her master slumped on the sofa in heavy, mournful silence. Observing Elsak's somber, distant gaze, the anxious maid carefully approaches him while holding the silver tea tray tightly with both hands. As she pours a hot, fragrant cup, Rhonda softly mentions that this fragrant rose tea was Tyria's absolute favorite drink. Sensing her master's profound sorrow, she offers a cheerful smile and warmly encourages him to stay strong, assuring him with quiet confidence that her beloved ladyship will surely pull through this difficult trial and return home safely. Realizing how deeply his visible distress is unsettling the maidservant, Elric manages a weak, apologetic smile, gently apologizing for causing unnecessary concern. Utterly flustered by his humble response, Rhonda bows deeply in panic before hurriedly exiting the room, leaving Elric sitting alone on the sofas as he gazes into the warm tea with an aching heart. Outside, a cold winter night settles under the bright full moon as Elric sends out a desperate, unspoken prayer for his wife's survival. Far away inside the town medical clinic, Tyria lies flushed and sweating profusely from a terrifyingly high fever, gasping breathlessly for air while a distressed medical assistant carefully records her rapidly deteriorating condition. Racked by a scorching fever inside the medical clinic, Tyria desperately struggles to stay awake, knowing she cannot give up now. As hot tears stream down her flushed face, her mind remains entirely fixated on her husband, agonizingly aware of just how deeply worried Elric must be for her. Noticing her sudden physical decline, the alarmed medical assistant steps forward, anxiously asking if her ladyship is all right. But the overwhelming strain proves far too much to bear, and Tyria slips away into complete unconsciousness as frantic cries of her name echo helplessly through the room. A grand black carriage cuts across the vast, snowbound grounds of the estate, bringing Lady Tyria home at long last. As her boots touch the frozen earth, she steps outside with a radiant and gentle smile, warmly greeting everyone present while hoping that everything has remained peaceful during her time away. Spotting her standing beside the carriage, the estate's maidservants come running across the snow with breathless relief. Young Marie flings herself straight into Tyria's arms for a tearful hug, while head maid Rhonda bows politely, expressing her overwhelming joy at seeing her lady fully recovered and offering to escort her inside. Tyria's cheeks warm as she quietly wonders how the Lord has been doing during their separation. Suddenly, the mansion's front doors burst open with a loud thud, and the Lord himself staggers into the doorway, shouting frantically to confirm if she has truly returned safe and sound. His eyes locked onto Tyria in disbelief, the Lord cries out her title and breaks into a desperate, frantic sprint straight through the snow. Tyria startles and asks him to wait a moment, but he rushes forward at full speed, driven entirely by raw panic and longing. Reaching her side, he gathers Tyria into a tight, desperate embrace, holding her firmly against his chest as if she might disappear. Tears quietly spill down his cheek while he whispers a sincere apology, asking only to hold her like this for a moment longer. Later that night, beneath a clear and starry sky, the estate settles into quiet while Tyria's bedroom fills with pure bliss. Clasping a pillow to her chest, she twirls joyfully around the room, repeatedly singing out his title before leaping headfirst onto the bed with unbounded happiness. Collapsing onto her bed, Tyria buries her face into a pillow, her heart still wildly pounding from the sudden, overwhelming warmth of her husband's embrace. Overcome with embarrassment and pure bliss, she kicks her feet in unrestrained delight, breathless at how deeply his desperate affection affected her after all their years apart. A sudden knock at the door shatters her private celebration. Maid Marie brightens up the room as she enters, carrying a tray of hot tea, only to catch her lady mid-twirl on the bed. Caught completely off guard while clutching her pillow, Tyria freezes in total, flustered embarrassment, her cheeks burning bright red. Quickly composing herself, Tyria offers a gentle, reassuring smile and welcomes Marie to join her for tea. As Marie serves the drinks, she bubbles over with excitement, eagerly asking for every detail of their past after discovering the shocking truth that Tyria and the Lord had actually met long ago as children. Gazing fondly down at her tea, Tyria recalls how remarkably bold and reckless young Elric had been. He impulsively proposed on the spot the very first day they met, only to make assumptions and disappear before hearing her answer. Yet destiny brought them face to face once again, that autumn right at the Portman estate. Her thoughts wander back to that autumn day, when their fathers held a private meeting at the mansion. Far from a pleasant visit, young Tyria suffered brutal discipline behind closed doors, forced to hold out her small hands as a heavy wooden switch struck her palms repeatedly while she bore the sharp pain in silence. When a worried maid attempted to intervene, her mother harshly shouted her down and demanded absolute silence. Staring cold-heartedly at the trembling child, she sternly reminded Tyria that her arranged marriage carried the entire fate of the Wibben family, coldly threatening to starve her for 2 days if she ever dared utter another complaint. Left alone after her frantic maid runs off to fetch medicine, young Tyria cradles her swollen, aching hands in solitary grief. Overwhelmed by deep pain and anxiety, tears stream down her face as she helplessly cries out, questioning why she must be forced to abandon her freedom and marry a complete stranger for her family's sake. A sudden thud shatters the silence of the hall when a young boy accidentally drops a heavy book to the floor. Turning around in surprise, Tyria wipes her tear-stained eyes to find young Elric crouching nearby, sheepishly raising his hand with an awkward greeting as he recognizes her. Sniffling softly, Tyria tearfully asks what he is doing there, prompting Elric to reveal that he is actually the son of this noble house. Struck by her evident sorrow, he curiously asks whom she is supposed to marry, and Tyria lowers her gaze, admitting that the marriage is an unwanted duty forced upon her. Moved by her quiet sadness, young Elric steps forward and boldly reaches out his open hand, promising to protect her and ensure she never has to go through with the arrangement. Tyria looks up at him in wide-eyed astonishment, her heart fluttering at his sudden, reckless chivalry. Back in the quiet comfort of her bedroom, Maid Marie gasps with unbounded excitement upon discovering the Lord's heroically bold side as a boy. Smiling fondly, Tyria playfully asks if Marie can guess where he took her right after that, making the young maid lean forward with intense, breathless curiosity. The past comes alive once more as young Elric proudly leads Tyria, holding her delicate parasol, out to meet his childhood playmates, who stare in utter amazement at her beauty. However, when the boys relentlessly tease him about getting rejected after his instant proposal, Elric flushes bright red and frantically insists he was never dumped, but simply left before hearing her answer. Refusing to back down from his friend's teasing, young Elric hastily declares that inviting someone as remarkably pretty as Tyria into their group was all part of his master plan. With his playmates, nodding along in awe, he proudly appoints her as their official medic before rallying everyone to charge off on their daily scouting mission. Once the initial excitement cools down, Elric pauses in the open field and turns to her with genuine seriousness. Citing formal military rules, he earnestly assures Tyria that as a medic of their unit, she is completely exempt from being forced into an unwanted marriage. Flushing bright red and shyly resting his hand against his cheek, the young boy softly delivers his true request. He asks if she will finally grant him her answer to his sudden proposal once he achieves his dream of becoming a royal knight. Recalling the past, she remembers how he gently assured her that as their unit's medic, she had no obligation to accept a forced marriage. Yet with a shy blush, he asked if she might consider his proposal once he earned his place as a royal knight. Listening to the tale, her maid teases her about his unwavering determination. She smiles softly, confessing that she couldn't offer him a proper answer that day because his friends suddenly returned and interrupted their quiet conversation. Instead of heavy words, they spent the entire day playing together across the sunny fields and mountains. Laughing as they chased after a harmless forest squirrel, she realized for the very first time just how wonderful a single day could truly feel. He excitedly led her to a grand wooden house tucked in the woods, introducing it as their clan's hidden base. Gazing up at the impressive building, she listened as he boldly declared his dream to build a knight's training center right there after his friends ran on ahead. With his companions inside, he took the chance to hand her a small tied pouch. Looking away with a flustered blush, he told her that every good medic ought to know her plants, softly encouraging her to sow the seeds hidden inside. Realizing that the vibrant flowers blooming in her garden today grew from that very pouch, her maid gushes over his hidden romantic nature. She simply smiles, cherishing the quiet devotion rooted in a simple gift given so long ago. A sharp knock on the door suddenly cuts their conversation short as head maid Rhonda calls out, asking if Marie is still inside. As her maid gasps in sheer panic, Tyria quickly steps in with a soft smile, taking the blame for holding her up with all her childhood stories. Rhonda sternly reminds her that the doctor ordered absolute rest, scolding both of them and insisting that the lady get into bed immediately. Meekly agreeing, Tyria pulls the blankets up to her chin while Rhonda bows low, wishing her a peaceful and quiet night. As our night falls over the mansion, Tyria falls fast asleep, slipping right back into her cherished childhood memories. She remembers resting on the wooden deck outside their hidden base, completely worn out after playing all day, sleeping peacefully beside Elric and his companions. Gazing down at Elric's sleeping face, she reached out to softly stroke his forehead, silently thanking him for such a wonderful day. With a shy blush coloring her cheeks, she finally found her answer, leaning over to kiss his cheek and softly declaring her decision to become his bride. When morning comes, Tyria sits up in bed with a bright blush, the warmth of that sweet memory lingering on her mind. Pulling herself up, she walks to the door and turns the handle, only to gasp in shock when she finds Elric standing directly outside her room. Opening her door the next morning, Tyria finds Elric standing right outside with a flustered smile, nervously asking if she would like to share morning tea with him. Caught off guard in her nightgown, she accepts with a warm blush, shyly asking him to wait just a moment while she gets dressed. Before he steps back, Tyria hesitates with a deep blush, timidly asking if he might begin addressing her as his wife instead of my lady. Taken completely off guard by her earnest request, Elric nervously rubs his hair before offering a gentle, embarrassed smile and softly agreeing to call her his wife. Tyria beams with overwhelming joy, her hands clasped tightly as tears of happiness glisten in her eyes at his gentle confirmation. Soon, 2 cups of freshly brewed tea are poured, creating a serene and intimate setting for their morning conversation. Dressed for the day, Tyria sits down to read the morning paper, explaining to Elric that monitoring foreign trade news is crucial since their estate's main income comes from exporting wheat abroad. When she mentions Chevor surrendering to the Empire, Elric becomes instantly intrigued, recalling his past spent fighting there as a mercenary. Unable to contain his curiosity, Elric instinctively shifts close beside her to peer over her shoulder at the newspaper. As he intently scans the headline reporting Trebor's unexpected fall, he remains completely unaware of how his sudden physical closeness leaves her breathless and flustered. Realizing how near their faces are, Tyria flinches with a deep blush, prompting Elric to immediately pull back in a panic and apologize for crowding her. Though she shyly reassures him it is fine, a sweet, fluttering awkwardness fills the air as both attempt to hide their burning red cheeks. As the quiet atmosphere lingers between them, Tyria glances up with a deeply flustered blush. Softly smiling, she closes her eyes expectantly as her heart races, letting the sudden closeness linger while Elric gently cups her face and leans in close. Their quiet moment is abruptly shattered when her maid bursts into the room, excitedly shouting that an invitation to the annual royal banquet has just arrived. Desperate to cover up their shared embarrassment, Tyria frantically hides behind her newspaper while Elric nervously chugs tea straight from the teapot, leaving the maid standing in utter confusion. Within the grandeur of the estate, peace has returned to their daily lives. Yet as they walk side by side through the quiet corridors, lingering shadows of their past still hang gently in the air. Holding an official invitation to the royal banquet, he stares down at the seal in quiet disbelief. He gently apologizes for how his family inherited her noble title, burdened by the guilt of their original union. He admits his regret over how his father's greed forced her into an arranged marriage. But resting her hand tenderly against her chest, she hesitates for a moment before speaking up to reveal something long left unsaid. Taken aback by her serious expression, he listens as her cheeks flush deep red. With sudden passion, she confesses that marrying him was never unwanted, declaring that every choice she made was of her own free will. When he steps closer and softly asks if she is truly happy being married to him, her heart falters. Overwhelmed by embarrassment, she hastily turns away and insists they must hurry to depart for the capital. Calling after her, he asks with a mild smile if she was really planning to endure a carriage ride all the way to the palace. She turns back, completely bewildered, asking how else anyone could possibly travel such a distance. At Wibbin Station, snow glistens over the platforms as she stops dead in her tracks, gazing up at the colossal steam engine in utter wonder. Unable to comprehend how such a massive iron beast can move, she looks to him in shock while he smiles at her sweet awe. Shyly admitting that carriages are all she has ever known, she listens intently as he reassures her that the train will turn days of tedious travel into mere hours. Offering his steady presence, he takes her arm and leads her aboard to begin their new chapter together. Inside their private cabin, her deep terror surfaces the moment the iron train rattles to life. Seeing her tremble uncontrollably in fear, he gently lifts her into his lap, reassuring the startled conductor while pulling her tightly against his chest to offer steady warmth and comfort. When a sharp blast of steam unexpectedly shrieks outside, she screams in panic, cowering against his knees and desperately pleading to return to a horse carriage instead. Smiling fondly at her sweet innocence, he tenderly pats her head and reassures her that the iron beast is merely venting steam. Hoping to soothe her lingering fear, he softly asks her to look toward the wall before pulling back the heavy velvet curtain. As radiant sunlight floods the compartment, her terror instantly dissolves into pure astonishment, clapping her hands with delight while marveling at the breathtaking winter scenery sweeping past. Watching her open joy, he asks with a fond smile if this magnificent view is unlike anything visible from a slow carriage. She turns back to him with glowing eyes and warmly agrees, only for their sweet intimacy to be abruptly broken by a respectful voice calling from the doorway. His relaxed expression instantly turns sharp as the conductor presents an unexpected delivery sent directly from a guest staying in the luxury VIP section. Taking the small, ornate box into his hands, he unclasps the lid to find a single golden bullet resting inside. Recognizing the distinctive custom round that once severely wounded his knee, his eyes narrow with intense focus. Knowing the assassin targeting his life is riding aboard this very train, he reads the cabin number engraved into the metal shell, determined to handle the threat before his wife is drawn into danger. Concealing his grim resolve behind a gentle, reassuring smile, he asks his wife to stay comfortably inside the cabin and wait for his return. Though slightly puzzled by his sudden errand, she nods obediently, completely unaware of the lethal confrontation awaiting him down the hall. Leaving his wife safely behind in their compartment, he steps out into the quiet train corridor with heavy, deliberate strides. Stopping right outside VIP room 103, he stares up at the brass number plaque with intense focus before taking a firm grip on the handle and pushing the heavy door open. Inside the lavish suite, a young blonde man with round glasses sits comfortably on the couch alongside a silent, silver-haired woman. The young man bursts into a wide, cheerful grin upon seeing him, casually calling out to greet his old friend Kasha before mockingly asking if he should be addressing him as Sir Elric Portman instead. Ignoring the provocative greeting, Elric's gaze darkens as he instantly reaches into his jacket and draws a sharp dagger. In a single explosive motion, he lunges across the small room with lethal intent, ready to strike down the man before him. Before his blade can land, the silver-haired woman moves with startling speed, drawing an ornate golden revolver straight at his head. But Elric's battle instincts prove superior. He catches her weapon mid-air and spins behind her, pressing the gleaming edge of his blade tightly against her throat. Undeterred by the steel against her neck, the woman smoothly pulls a second golden gun from her side and jams the muzzle directly into his stomach. Tension suffocates the room as both combatants hold their breath in a deadly frozen standoff, each fully capable of taking the other's life in a fraction of a second. Panicking as the room turns into an impending bloodbath, the blonde man frantically waves his hands and screams for both of them to halt immediately. He scolds his secretary, Agnes, ordering her to lower her gun and show proper respect to a man recognized as one of the 7 strongest swordsmen on the continent. He then turns back to Elric with a serious, cautioning tone, begging him to pull his dagger back from Agnes's throat. He sternly warns that she is an extraordinary marksman, and even if her throat were cut right now, her reflexes would still allow her to fire at least 3 bullets into Elric before she stops breathing. With his crimson eyes narrowing in sharp concentration, Elric calculates the deadly exchange in an instant. A swift strike from his blade against a barrage of close-range gunfire would leave blood spilled across the floor and instantly end both of their lives. Recognizing the fatal risk of continuing the lunge, Elric freezes his movement just as the gleaming knife rests against her neck. Facing an opponent equally capable of taking his life, he holds his stance, measuring the high stakes of their stalemate. Sheathing his dagger with deliberate calm, Elric declares that continuing such a battle yields nothing for either side. Agnes lowers her dual revolvers and steps away with an unwavering stare, allowing the suffocating tension inside the VIP cabin to finally subside. Turning his intense, unyielding gaze toward the young blonde man lounging on the couch, Elric refuses to be drawn into playful games. He sternly grants him a strict limit of 30 minutes, demanding a complete explanation for why he was summoned to this room. As the train hurtles across the snow-covered landscape, a strict 30-minute deadline is imposed to state the purpose of this meeting. Sitting in the quiet luxury of the compartment, the request is made clear. It is time for the legendary warrior Kasha to retire from the battlefield. Mere rumors of Kasha's disappearance are insufficient. He wants a formal, official announcement of retirement. But Elric remains unmoved. Refusing to take such a risk when revealing his face in public would instantly expose his location to the countless enemies he has made over the years. Refusing to expose himself needlessly, Elric dismisses the idea of a public announcement. The merchant quickly pivots, eagerly suggesting a direct mercenary contract instead, only for Elric to instantly turn him down with a cold refusal that leaves him completely deflated. Recovering his composure, the merchant asks what the Western Front meant to Kasha. For his own financial conglomerate, the war zone was a gold mine where every faction relied on his loans, making the front line synonymous with the flow of capital, though Elric remains entirely unimpressed. He reveals that while he held the entire wartime market under his control, the unexpected rise of Kasha as the fearsome sword demon threw every prediction into chaos. As the single greatest variable threatening his financial empire, he considers this proposal necessary to regain control. Cornered in the compartment, the merchant delivers a crisp ultimatum, demanding that Kasha either officially announce his retirement or sell his blade exclusively to him. But Elric firmly rejects both conditions, making a single quiet promise instead. He will never set foot on the Western Front again. Before taking his leave, Elric addresses Duke White directly, warning him never to show his face before them ever again. Refusing to let the confrontation end in total defeat, the merchant grimly demands that Elric hold true to his pledge, making it clear he takes his business far too seriously to lose. The merchant boldly claims that his devotion to his financial empire matches Elric's dedication to his own wife. Hearing his beloved brought into the conflict, Elric freezes for a quiet moment, then coldly vows to keep his word so that neither of them ever has to pay a terrible price. Exuding a terrifying aura, Elric turns on his heel and storms out of the luxury carriage, slamming the heavy door in his wake. As the lingering pressure finally lifts, the thoroughly intimidated merchant slumps onto the sofa, trembling as he quietly asks his bodyguard if she brought spare clothes. Meanwhile, far from the snowbound train, the story shifts to the opulent halls of the Nimrod estate. An elderly butler pauses outside a lavish set of doors, knocking carefully to announce himself to young Master Amun, only to hear a panicked shout telling him to hold on for just a moment. A moment later, a handsome, flushed young noble opens the door clad in an open robe, asking what has brought his servant by. The loyal butler dutifully reports that he has just returned from delivering the custom design for his new tailcoat directly to the local tailor. Brushing off his butler's stern reminder regarding his questionable conduct with the estate servants, young Master Amun remains completely unbothered. He swiftly turns the conversation to Lady Tyria, eagerly inquiring if she will be attending the annual banquet, only to learn that she has already set out on her journey. Overjoyed by the news, Amun immediately bursts into a dramatic, delusional fantasy. boasting about how easily he will captivate her heart once her guard is down. However, his theatrical daydream is instantly shattered when the butler dryly reveals that her husband, Elric Portman, returned months ago and is currently traveling by her side. Furious that a husband who abandoned his wife for over a decade suddenly has the nerve to show his face, Aman sharply orders his butler to track down their location. Once his servant bows and leaves, Aman harbors a dark resolve, swearing to make Elric realize he is entirely unworthy of having Tyria. Far away from the drama, Elric and Tyria arrive at the Grand Portman family main estate. Looking up at the familiar grounds, Elric offers his wife a warm, quiet smile, admitting that he actually spent far more of his early childhood in Wibben than he ever did within these noble walls. As evening falls over the estate, the couple heads inside the quiet mansion, where Elric suddenly stops in his tracks. Hanging prominently upon the wall is an exquisite framed portrait of his father and late mother, a radiant piece of artwork he has never seen displayed in all his years. Tyria gently reveals that she found the affectionate portrait neglected in dark storage, and personally persuaded his father to let her hang it up. Elric gazes at her in genuine disbelief, deeply touched yet stunned, as his father had previously refused to even let the subject of his late mother be raised. Tyria sweetly reveals that after Elric ran away, his father assigned the main master bedroom to her, explicitly planning for the two of them to share its generous space once he returned. Thoroughly embarrassed by his father's shameless matchmaking, a blushing Elric covers his face and hurriedly suggests she get some rest, leaving her asking where he will sleep. Offering a quick wave and a sheepish smile, Elric insists that he will sleep in his own room tonight and tells her not to worry. Tyria's face collapses into a pout of utter deflation as she reluctantly turns away, trailing off with a disappointed goodnight as she retreats to her room alone. Collapsing face down onto the oversized bed, Tyria thrashes her legs in overwhelming frustration. Recalling how intensely affectionate and passionate he had been with her previously, she fumes over his sudden restraint, desperately wishing he would act like a romantic husband and boldly demand to share her bed. Her dramatic sulking is cut short when a heavy splintering noise shatters the nighttime quiet. Recognizing that the loud thud came straight from Elric's bedroom, Tyria leaps up in surprise, throws her door open, and hurriedly runs down the corridor in her nightgown to check on him. Rushing into his quarters, she finds the housemaids hovering around Elric, who sits completely flabbergasted on top of a crushed bed frame. The servants excitedly explain the situation to their mistress, revealing that the old wooden bed completely collapsed beneath him. Awkwardly laughing off the disaster, Elric apologizes to his wife for making a scene and suggests sleeping on the living room sofa instead. But Tyria quickly cuts him off, her cheeks turning bright red as she bashfully insists that since the situation is unavoidable, he will be sharing her room tonight.